Chapter 1728. He silently led Xiao Chen and Hong Xiu all the way to the treasury of the Renhuang sect and opened the entrance of the treasury. He did not resist at all throughout the entire process. In front of Xiao Chen, the entire human emperor sect had no ability to resist. However, after the door of the treasury opened, the white-haired elder suddenly looked at Xiao Chen and asked, will the second barren territory really be destroyed? What do you think? Can the second barren territory continue to exist without the power of the origin? Xiao Chen asked. There was no need to ask this question. Without origin energy, it would have been impossible for the second wilderness to continue existing. It would have been destroyed sooner or later. However, the wills of the heavenly ways had taken action, which was why the destruction of the second wilderness had sped up. With that, Xiao Chen did not give the white-haired old man a chance to speak. He directly brought Hong Xiu to the human emperor sect's treasury. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the white-haired old man was stunned where he stood. No one knew what he was thinking. When they reached the treasury, Xiao Chen suddenly stopped and said flatly without turning his head. The second wilderness has fallen into the hands of the Hachibra Senkai, so the will of the heavenly way would rather destroy the second wilderness than let the Hachibra Senkai obtain it. This is the truth. As for why the second wilderness is being destroyed so quickly, it's because the will of the heavenly way worked together to destroy the rules of the second wilderness. This made the second wilderness, which already had no origin energy, even worse. Based on the current situation, the second wilderness can only last for half a month at most. Time is of the essence. The Hachibra Senkai can't do anything now. They can only use starships to save the creatures in the second wilderness. Although this is like a drop in the bucket for the entire second wilderness, we'll save as many as we can. The Hachibra Senkai will bring these people back to the first wilderness and let them live there. I can give the human emperor sect 10,000 places. After saying that, Xiao Chen stepped into the treasury. Hong Xiu, who was standing at the side, was also stunned. She quickly regained her senses and saw that Xiao Chen had already entered the treasury. She hurriedly chased after him. After Xiao Chen and Hong Xiu entered the treasury, the white-haired old man stood there with a complicated expression. He did not know what to do. Or rather, he was not sure that the will of the heavenly way would really come back to save them. This was because until now, the will of the heavenly way had not shown up in the second wilderness. Many of the powerful beings in the second wilderness had also disappeared, just like the will of the heavenly way. On the other hand, the Hachibra Senkai had stepped forward and was willing to save the second wilderness. However, now it seemed that the Hachibra Senkai had no other choice. Feeling extremely conflicted, the white-haired old man murmured softly, "Will the second wilderness really go extinct?" Not caring about the white-haired old man's thoughts, Xiao Chen did not hesitate after entering the treasury of the human emperor sect. He immediately began to loot. No matter what it was, whether it was weapons, elixirs, or various spiritual fruits and spiritual herbs, Xiao Chen collected everything he passed into his storage ring. In the end, Xiao Chen's storage ring was full. Fortunately, Xiao Chen still had other storage rings on him. There were 20 or 30 of them in total. As a result, they were barely enough to store the various resources in the treasury of the human emperor sect. The destruction of the second wilderness was imminent. Regardless of whether the cultivation resources were useful or not, they naturally had to be taken away. Otherwise, it would be a waste to leave them here. Because there was no need to pick, Xiao Chen quickly put everything in the human emperor sect's treasury into his storage ring. A total of 20 to 30 storage rings were now filled to the brim. After doing all that, Xiao Chen and Hong Xiu walked out of the treasury of the human emperor sect. However, the white-haired old man was no longer there. He did not stand guard at the entrance of the treasury. Xiao Chen did not say anything about this. He had already said what he needed to say. Xiao Chen had also given the human emperor sect 10,000 places. Although the 10,000 places were too good for the millions of disciples of the human emperor sect, at least it would leave some descendants of the human emperor sect. It would not be destroyed just like that. As for whether the white-haired old man was willing to believe him and choose 10,000 people to return to the first wilderness with the Hachibra Senkai, that was not something Xiao Chen needed to consider. He had already done what he could. As for whether the other party appreciated his kindness, that was their business. If the white-haired old man still did not believe him and still believed that the heavenly way would come to save them, then Xiao Chen had nothing to say. He could only wait for his death. Soon, they returned to the starry sky of the seventh realm. At this moment, many geniuses of the seventh realm were still collecting various cultivation resources in the human emperor sect. Xiao Chen did not rush them. At the same time, a voice-transmitting talisman once again entered Xiao Chen's mind. This time, it was not a message from Luoli, but from the wine Taoist. He told Xiao Chen that the starship of the seventh realm was already close to the human emperor continent. They were responsible for evacuating the people of the human emperor continent. They should arrive in half a day. Xiao Chen did not need to worry about the evacuation of the human emperor continent. The wine Taoist, Li Qiu, and other cultivators of the seventh realm would handle it. Xiao Chen only needed to collect the cultivation resources on the human emperor continent. The wine Taoist and the others were on their way to the human emperor continent. After receiving this news, Xiao Chen stood on the deck and looked into the distance. A complicated look flashed in his eyes. In half a month, the human emperor continent and even the second wilderness would be destroyed. Most of the creatures living in the second wilderness would be disappointed in the end. After all, only a few people could be saved by the Hachibra Senkai. More people would be destroyed along with the second wilderness. Of course, warriors at the level of the great sage could cross the void and leave the second wilderness with their own strength. However, this was limited to the great sage. After all, the first wilderness was too large. It was almost impossible to fly out of the first wilderness with one's own strength without relying on a starship. Only the great sage had a chance to do it. Of course, there was also the risk of death. As for those below the level of the great sage, it was impossible for them to fly out of the second wilderness with their own strength, even if it was a quasi-sage. Moreover, there were no starships in the second wilderness that could travel between the wastelands. Although they were both starships, the starships of the Hachibra Senkai were much more advanced than the ones in the second wilderness. Only then could they travel between the wasteland. It was almost a dead end. Just as Xiao Chen was feeling sorry for the imminent destruction of the second wilderness, the white-haired elder suddenly appeared in front of the starship. He bowed to Xiao Chen and said, "Heir, I have something to say to you." Chapter 5. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1729. The white-haired elder from the human emperor sect had suddenly appeared before Xiao Chen. Hearing that the elder had something to say to him, Xiao Chen said flatly, "Speak." Xiao Chen didn't hate the human emperor sect. It was the strong cultivators from the human emperor sect who had been rude to him, but so what? They were already a group of people who were about to die, so why bother with them over these things? It was indeed ironic that they would die at the hands of the will of the heavenly way, whom they had been loyal to all their lives. Looking at Xiao Chen's indifferent expression, the white-haired elder sighed softly and said, "May I ask, heir, if I choose 10,000 disciples, where should I go to find you?" When Xiao Chen had said that he could give the human emperor sect 10,000 spots, the white-haired elder had been very conflicted. However, after thinking for a while, he finally chose to believe Xiao Chen. At this point, the white-haired elder couldn't think of any reason why Xiao Chen would lie to him. There was no need to sow discord. After all, the human emperor sect's treasures had been taken away by Xiao Chen and the others. Xiao Chen and the others could just leave. Why did they have to say those words to him and give the human emperor sect 10,000 spots? Hearing this, Shao Chen looked at the white-haired elder indifferently and said, "The seventh realm will send someone else to take care of the evacuation. They'll arrive in half a day. Take this token and just say that I gave you a spot." With that, Shao Chen casually threw a token to the white-haired elder. This token was the token of Shao Chen as the heir of the seventh realm. As long as they saw this token, the strong cultivators of the seventh realm wouldn't make things difficult for the white-haired elder. Carefully taking the token, the white-haired elder said respectfully to Shao Chen, "No matter what, I still want to thank you for your kindness." Regardless of whether Shao Chen was telling the truth or not, the white-haired old man was truly grateful from the bottom of his heart. Shao Chen did not mind the white-haired old man's thanks. He waved his hand and indicated for him to leave. After which, the white-haired old man bid him farewell and left. Without much resistance, all the cultivation resources in the human emperor sect were soon plundered by the geniuses of the seventh realm. After that, Shao Chen left with his people and went to other places on the human emperor continent. Time was of the essence, so Shao Chen and the others chose to split up and go to various sects in the human emperor continent to collect their cultivation resources. What Shao Chen and the others did was indeed a little rough. In the eyes of the major sects of the human emperor continent, they were no different from robbers. However, the strong preyed on the weak in this world. Moreover, under such circumstances, it was even more so. It was impossible for the Hachibra Senkai to get nothing in the end after working so hard to conquer the second wilderness. They could not even protect their own lives, let alone cultivation resources. Therefore, wherever Shao Chen and the others went, all the forces on the human emperor continent were plundered. In the face of Shao Chen and the others, these forces naturally would not take the initiative to hand over their cultivation resources. However, in the face of absolute strength, they had no choice. After a round of beating, it became obedient and obediently handed over all the cultivation resources. After a few days, the wine Taoist and the others had already arrived on the human emperor continent. Dozens of starships were parked on a grassland in the center of the human emperor continent called the human emperor plain. Moreover, the news had already been spread out. Unfortunately, the wine Taoist and the others were helpless. After a few days, there were only a few cultivators from the human emperor continent who came here. Obviously, they did not believe the words of the wine Taoist and the others. The second wilderness was going to be destroyed. In the eyes of the cultivators of the human emperor continent, this was just an alarmist talk. It was a trick of the Hachibra Senkai. They did not trust the wine Taoist and the others at all. They felt that the wine Taoist and the others were talking nonsense and plotting something. In this regard, the wine Taoist and the others were incomparably depressed. After a few days, only the white-haired old man of the human emperor sect came once. He told the wine Taoist that Shao Chen had given the human emperor sect 10,000 places. Now that the people had been selected, they would arrive at the human emperor plain in a few days. At that time, he hoped that the wine Taoist and the others could take care of them. The white-haired old man of the human emperor sect was very humble. He had no choice. After all, the wine Taoist was an almighty immortal venerable who could break through to the immortal emperor realm at any time. No one believed in him. This time, the wine Taoist, Li Qiu and several other experts of the seventh world gathered together. Li Qiu looked at the crowd and said, "It's been 5 days. What do you think of the current situation?" "Humph. A bunch of fools. In my opinion, since they want to die, let them be." Upon hearing this, one of the experts of the seventh world shouted coldly. Originally, the 100 starships of the seventh world could save about 500,000 to 600,000 people. But now, only 10,000 people of the human emperor sect had arrived at the human emperor plane after 5 days. They were here to save people, but they made it seem like the experts of the seventh world were begging them to leave. Naturally, they were displeased. Hearing this, the others looked unfriendly. In the end, the wine Taoist said, Now, the other forces of the human emperor continent don't believe in us at all. There's not much time left. We can't persuade them one by one. Why don't we give all the places to the human emperor sect? Since the other forces didn't believe in the seventh world, they might as well give all the places to the human emperor sect. After all, the human emperor sect had hundreds of disciples. Hearing this, the rest of the experts of the seventh world nodded in agreement. All right, I think the old drunkard's idea is good. Since they want to die, let them be. We'll just save those who want to live. They had the ability to save people, but now they were being ignored. Who wouldn't be angry? Li Qiu, who was sitting on the main seat, pondered for a moment. Then, he nodded slightly and said, "All right, let's tell the human emperor sect the news and see what they have to say." If the seventh world gave all the places to the human emperor sect, it meant that the people of the other forces on the human emperor continent had no chance to survive. On the second day after Li Qiu and the others told the human emperor sect the news, a great change took place on the human emperor continent. There was no night or day in the human emperor continent. On this day, a loud noise came from the sky. Immediately, the black sky was torn apart as if it was being torn apart. Countless spatial cracks filled the sky. At the same time, from those cracks, lightning constantly crisscrossed. The scene was as if doomsday had arrived. Chapter 6. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1730. The sudden change made all the cultivators in the human emperor continent involuntarily raise their heads to look at the sky. Everyone's face was filled with shock. The scene in front of them was just too shocking. Even the old monsters who had lived for countless years had never seen such a scene before. Cracks that looked like spider webs filled the entire sky densely. Within the cracks, countless lightning bolts crisscrossed, as if they would burst out from the cracks at any time and destroy the entire human emperor continent. It was really the end of the world. Of course, such a scene didn't only happen in the human emperor continent, but also in the entire second desolate land. In the human emperor plain, Wine Taoist and Li Qiu stood side by side, looking at the countless cracks in the sky and the lightning bolts in the crack. Even though Li Qiu was already an immortal emperor, his heart couldn't help but tremble in the face of such a large number of lightning bolts. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that any of the lightning bolts in the mountain peaks had already exceeded the heavenly punishment that would only appear when one broke through to the great saint realm. Moreover, the number of lightning bolts seemed endless. With a solemn expression, Li Qiu said faintly, "It seems like it's faster than expected. Old drunkard, is there any news from the human emperor sect?" The various sector lords had estimated that the destruction of the second desolate land would take around half a month. But now, it seemed like the time had been pushed forward again. In less than half a month, the second desolate land would be completely destroyed. Facing Li Qiu's question, Wine Taoist replied with a solemn expression, "We've already sent the news over yesterday, but we haven't received a reply yet. Go and urge them." "There's no time left," said Li Qiu in a deep voice. "We have to speed up." As soon as Li Qiu's voice faded, a voice transmission talisman streaked across the sky and entered the space between Li Qiu's eyebrows. The voice transmission talisman was sent by Luoli. It was a simple order. They had to evacuate from the second desolate land within 3 days, regardless of the situation at that time. Only 3 days were given to Li Qiu. Obviously, Luoli and the others had also discovered the changes in the second desolate land. Time was running out. Not only Li Qiu, Xiao Chen had also received the order from Luoli. In the past few days, Xiao Chen had been collecting all kinds of cultivation resources in the human emperor continent. However, the order given by Luoli to Xiao Chen was the same as Li Qiu's. They had to evacuate the second desolate land within 3 days. Even if there were uncollected resources, they wouldn't. In the last 3 days, the time had shortened a lot. In the main hall of the human emperor sect, The white-haired old man and a group of great sage and emperors of the human emperor sect gathered together and looked at everyone. The white-haired old man said in a deep voice, "What?" The white-haired old man spoke bluntly without beating around the bush. If this had happened a few days ago, everyone would have refused without hesitation. But now, looking at the sky, they had no idea what to do. The great changes in the sky told everyone that the second desolate land and the human emperor continent had come to an end. Facing the lightning in the cracks, everyone present trembled with fear. Moreover, things had developed to this point. The will of the heavenly way still hadn't appeared in the second desolate land. In fact, everyone was already leaning towards the Hachibra Senkai. They gradually began to believe that the great changes in the second desolate land were indeed caused by the will of the heavenly way, because he had every reason and motive to do so. If they lost the second desolate land and allowed it to be occupied by the Hachibra Senkai, it wouldn't be impossible for the will of the heavenly way to destroy the second desolate land. On the other hand, the Hachibra Senkai had no reason to destroy the second desolate land. Moreover, if it was really caused by the Hachibra Senkai, why would the Hachibra Senkai help them? They could have just watched from the sidelines. From the beginning to the end, it was the experts of the Hachibra Senkai who helped. However, the will of the heavenly way and the experts of the second desolate land were nowhere to be seen. The great sage and emperors of the human emperor sect began to realize that they had really been abandoned by the second desolate heavenly way's will. However, it was indeed a little too late to realize it now. At least the seventh realm had given the human emperor sect 600,000 places. As long as these 600,000 people could safely escape this disaster, the human emperor sect's foundation would still be there. Unfortunately, compared to the human emperor sect, the other sects on the human emperor continent no longer had the slightest chance because all the quotas had been given to the human emperor sect by the seventh realm. At this time, it was impossible for them to withdraw even if they wanted to. The hall fell into silence. After a while, one of the great sage said, 600,000 places are not enough. We have millions of disciples in the human emperor sect. There's no other way. This is already the limit. All the starships of the seventh realm can only ensure that 600,000 people leave. This is the limit, said the white-haired old man. Sometimes people were too greedy. They wanted more after getting a little. After hearing the white-haired old man's words, everyone present realized that at least half of the disciples of the human emperor sect would be abandoned. But what could they do? 600,000 people was already the limit. Any more and no one would be able to leave. In fact, everyone present had already made a decision. They had all begun to believe the Hachibra Senkai's words. They just wanted more places. Unfortunately, there were none left. Just as everyone was discussing, a voice transmission talisman entered the white-haired old man's glabella. It was a message from the Wine Taoist. He wanted to know the decision of the human emperor sect. He wanted to know if they wanted the 600,000 people. The message also told the white-haired old man that there were only 3 days left. After 3 days, no matter what happened to the human emperor sect, the seventh realm would have to leave the second desolate land. There were only 3 days left. After receiving the message, the white-haired old man was stunned for a moment. He then looked at everyone and said, "The Wine Taoist has come. The destruction of the second desolate land has accelerated. There are only 3 days left. After 3 days, no matter what, they will leave immediately. Now they want us to give them an answer." As soon as the white-haired old man spoke, one of the great saint emperors stood up and said, "Then what are you hesitating for? Agree. As for the selection of candidates, there are still 3 days. We can still discuss it, but we must get the quota. We can't let other forces take it away. Who would want to die if they could live?" Hearing this, the others also agreed. Since the seventh realm had given the 600,000 places to the human emperor sect, it was impossible for them to give them up. Chapter 7. please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1731. Upon hearing their words, the white-haired old man nodded and said, "All right, then I'll revert to Senior Wine Taoist." As he spoke, the white-haired old man took out a voice transmission talisman and sent a reply to Wine Taoist. Soon, Wine Taoist replied and told the white-haired old man that he would lead the disciples of the Human Emperor sect to the Human Emperor plains within 3 days. After the decision was made, it was time to select the quota. After all, there were more than 1 million people in the Human Emperor sect. Of course, this number included the servants, registered disciples, and so on. In fact, it was very simple to determine the quota. After deducting the servants and registered disciples, the official disciples of the Human Emperor sect, as well as the elite disciples, deacons, elders, and so on, there were exactly 600,000 people. Therefore, the great saint emperors in the main hall soon decided to abandon the handymen and nominal disciples. They would only lead the official disciples and those who were above them away. At first glance, this decision seemed very cruel, but in fact, it was not. After all, in a sect, the survival of the fittest was inevitable. Not to mention a sect, it was the same in this world. The fittest would live and the fittest would die. In the face of life and death, the great sage of the Human Emperor sect chose the official disciples to abandon the servants and registered disciples. This was understandable. As for the reason, it was very simple. It was because the official disciples were more talented and stronger. It was that simple. Soon, they made their choice. Upon seeing this, the white-haired old man immediately said in a deep voice, "In that case, go and prepare. Tomorrow morning, we will depart for the Human Emperor plains." Time was of the essence, and there was no room for delay. The Human Emperor sect had taken up all the quota of the 7th realm. However, the other sects on the Human Emperor continent did not care at all. It could even be said that they still thought that the second wilderness will of the heavenly way would come to save them. It was simply a daydream, waiting for the second wilderness will of the heavenly way to save them. It was no longer a matter of whether it was a miracle or not. Would you hope that a murderer would come to save you? It was ridiculous. They thought that everything could still be saved and that the will of the heavenly way would return. When that time came, the second wilderness would return to peace. As for the Human Emperor sect, weren't they very close to the 7th realm? Well, when the will of the heavenly way returned, let's see how the Human Emperor sect would explain themselves to the will of the heavenly way. These people were still laughing at the Human Emperor sect, as if they could already see the will of the heavenly way's return and the Human Emperor sect being punished by the will of the heavenly way. They did not realize that they were of the Human Emperor of the Human Emperor sect, the quota of the Human Emperor of the heavenly way. In other words, they had personally handed over the quota that originally belonged to them to the Human Emperor sect. This was because they did not believe in the Hachibra Sankai at all. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, they had ignored the Hachibra Sankai's words. In the beginning, the Human Emperor sect only had 10,000 quotas. Originally, the Wine Taoist and the others had planned to allocate some quotas to every sect and family on the Human Emperor continent. This way, even if they could not save all of them, they could at least leave behind some incense and inheritance. Unfortunately, these people thought they were clever and didn't take the Wine Taoist and the others seriously at all. They had no intention of taking the spot at all. It was even to the extent that the Wine Taoist and the others had sent people to invite them to the mortal Emperor plains, but not a single one of them had come. They were so ignorant that they had completely given up their last chance of survival. Even now, they were still waiting to see the Human Emperor sect make a fool of themselves. Compared to the ignorance of these people, the Human Emperor sect was different. In just one night, they had already completed the preparations for the evacuation. In fact, there was nothing much to prepare because all the cultivation resources of the Human Emperor sect had been taken away by Shaoqun. At this moment, the disciples of the human emperor sect could be said to have nothing to do. They could leave for the human emperor planes with just a flick of their shoulders. There was nothing to prepare at all. As for the quota, the human emperor sect did not reveal anything to the outside world. What a joke! There were only so many quotas to begin with. The human emperor sect did not even have enough for themselves. Why would they tell the other forces? Did they want them to snatch the quota from them? Not a single word was leaked. Therefore, early the next morning, hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor sect rushed to the human emperor plains. Of course, the servants and in-name disciples were mercilessly abandoned. The official disciples and a flash of people were all led by the great sage of the human emperor sect to the human emperor plains. At the same time, only one night had passed and the crack in the sky had become even bigger. Even the lightning in the crack looked as if it could strike down at any time and destroy the human emperor continent. The situation did not improve at all. On the contrary, it was getting worse. As a result, the people of the human emperor sect did not dare to hesitate any longer. They only wanted to get to the human emperor plains as soon as possible. While the human emperor sect was rushing to the human emperor plains, another day had passed. On this day, the thing that everyone was most worried about finally happened. The terrifying lightning in the crack finally struck down from the sky and hit an inconspicuous small city on the human emperor continent. This city was nothing in the human emperor continent. It could only be considered as an extremely ordinary city that could be seen everywhere. Even so, the lightning struck down from the sky and the Shaoqin disappeared almost instantly. That's right, it had disappeared. Not even a trace of damage was left behind. The entire city seemed to have disappeared into thin air. It had been forcibly obliterated. Along with the city, the millions of people who lived in the city had also disappeared. Millions of people, along with a city, were wiped out in an instant. When the surrounding warriors came to the place where the small city was originally located, they saw that it was already empty. There was nothing left. There was only a barren land and a huge pit that almost pierced through the Runhuang continent. Looking at the scene before them, the cultivators who came to investigate were all stunned. One must know that this was only the power of a single lightning strike. There were countless mountain peaks like this in the crack in the sky. If the lightning in the crack struck the human emperor continent like this, then the consequences would be, everyone was horrified. After a long while, one of them said in a daze, "It might be true. What the Hachibara Senkai said might be true. The human emperor continent, no, the entire second wilderness is probably going to be destroyed." Chapter 8. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1732. Almost in an instant, a city with a population of over 1 million disappeared. Seeing such a scene, everyone was naturally stunned. While they were still in a daze, a strange glint flashed in their eyes when they heard the man's words. The second wilderness of the human emperor continent was probably going to perish. The Hachibara Senkai wasn't lying. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines. But soon, someone else spoke up. In that case, the 8 Desolation Immortal Worlds said they could give us some spots to safely evacuate the human emperor continent. After witnessing a city being razed to the ground in an instant, these people were reminded of the quota. As soon as the man spoke, the rest of the people present disappeared on the spot without hesitation, returning to their respective sections. Quota. We must get a quota. This was the thought in everyone's mind. The disappearance of this small city was, in fact, just the beginning. However, the news quickly spread across the human emperor continent. At the same time, after the first bolt of lightning, more and more bolts of lightning shot towards the mortal emperor continent without any pattern. These bolts of lightning were more likely to hit cities. Many of them hit uninhabited mountain ranges. However, there was one thing that was without a doubt. No matter where the lightning struck, the place that was struck would definitely be obliterated. The power of these lightning bolts was too great. It was so great that everyone was terrified and shocked. Another day passed. The frequency of lightning strikes increased. In the beginning, there was only one lightning bolt every 4 to 6 hours. Now, there would be 2 to 3 lightning bolts every 2 to 3 hours. Moreover, the number of lightning bolts that fell at one time had also increased. In the beginning, there was only one lightning bolt every time. Now, there were 2 to 3 lightning bolts falling at one time. This change made everyone on the human emperor continent panic. In just one day, the human emperor continent was almost riddled with holes. Wherever the lightning struck, there would be deep pits. It was as though the human emperor continent was going to be destroyed. If this continued, the human emperor continent would be destroyed in a month at most. Everyone was shocked. However, they were still wrong about one thing. The destruction of the human emperor continent didn't need a long time. No matter what, everyone finally remembered the quota given to them by the Hachibra Senkai. Everyone wanted to go to the human emperor plains. While countless people were rushing to the human emperor plains, the great sage of the human emperor sect had already arrived with 600,000 disciples of the human emperor sect. Under the command of the seventh realm, 600,000 disciples boarded the seventh realm's starship in an orderly manner. Everything proceeded in an orderly manner. Standing proudly in the sky, Li Qiu and Wine Daoist watched the human emperor sect disciples being arranged to board the starship. Li Qiu said faintly, "We should be able to depart today." The quota was full and the situation in the second wilderness was getting more and more dangerous. Therefore, Li Qiu decided to leave today. Wine Daoist did not object to Li Qiu's words. Although 600,000 people were like a drop in the ocean compared to the entire human emperor continent, so what? The Hachibra Senkai had indeed experienced it. The living beings of the first wilderness are just like that. Don't kill them so deeply. Wine Daoist sighed and took a sip of wine. Hearing this, Li Qiu unceremoniously snatched the wine pot from Wine Daoist's hand. As if to vent his anger, he took a big gulp and said coldly, "That's why the heavens treat all things like straw dogs." After saying that, Li Qiu casually threw the wine pot to Wine Daoist. Ever since he joined the seventh realm, Wine Daoist had been carrying a wine pot with him. However, compared to before, the wine pot on his back was gone. He should be in the seventh wilderness now. Li Qiu and Wine Daoist felt sorry for the second wilderness, but there was nothing they could do. Just as the two of them were conversing, a clamor suddenly rang out from the ground below. Everyone raised their heads to look at the sky with a terrified expression on their faces. Under everyone's gaze, a bolt of lightning came crashing down from the sky, heading straight for the human emperor plains. Seeing the lightning strike, the disciples of the human emperor sect screamed in horror. "It's over! It's over! Hurry up and run!" Some people fell to the ground in fear, while others fled in all directions. But soon, the immortals of the seventh realm unleashed their auras to suppress the panicking crowd. What's there to panic about? That's heavenly punishment. Not even the great sage could stop it. Many disciples of the human emperor sect cried out in despair. Upon hearing this, several immortal realm experts from the seventh realm replied coldly, "Only Elder Li Qiu and Senior Wine Daoist from the seventh realm can deal with them. Your current mission is to board the starship as soon as possible. Hurry, continue. Don't stop." There was no need for them to worry about the lightning. Only Li Qiu and Wine Daoist could deal with it. As the immortal realm experts from the seventh realm spoke, the Wine Daoist and Li Qiu looked at the bolt of lightning that descended from the sky. Without saying anything, Wine Daoist took a step forward and said softly, "Let me do it." A single bolt of lightning was nothing to an almighty expert like Wine Daoist. Of course, if there were too many of them, even Li Qiu wouldn't be able to stop them, let alone Wine Daoist. Wine Daoist looked indifferently at the bolt of lightning in the sky, and a towering aura slowly spread out from his body. This aura was far stronger than the great sage. In front of this aura, the great sage was as insignificant as an ant. Wine Taoist's cultivation had reached the limit of the complete immortal venerable realm, and he was only half a step away from the immortal emperor realm. Wine Taoist looked at the mountain peak in the sky and slowly stretched out his right palm. It seemed casual, but soon a terrifying pressure fell from the sky. Then, the disciples of the human emperor sect saw that the space around the mountain peak seemed to have solidified. Moreover, the power of law and spiritual energy constantly gathered together, forming a spiritual energy vortex that devoured the bolt of lightning in an instant. Universe of myriad Tao. Wine Taoist gently clenched his right palm, and the vortex formed by the power of law and spiritual energy spun rapidly. As for the bolt of lightning, it was firmly sealed in the vortex. As the vortex spun, the bolt of lightning was quickly torn apart by the universe of myriad Tao. Chapter 9. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendations. Chapter 1733. The whirlpool of spiritual energy enveloped the lightning. Soon, the lightning was extinguished by Wine Taoist. A bolt of lightning that could instantly destroy a city and obliterate millions of lives had been forcefully obliterated by the Wine Taoist, just like that. Moreover, it had only been a few dozen breaths since the Wine Taoist had attacked. That's it? Looking at Wine Taoist, who was standing proudly in the sky, the disciples of Human Emperor sect below were dumbfounded. In fact, they couldn't be blamed. Not to mention the disciples, even the deacons, elders, and the great sage of Human Emperor sect were stunned. It couldn't be helped. With the strength of Human Emperor sect, they had no chance to come into contact with existences at Wine Taoist's level. Even the white-haired old man had only come into contact with immortal realm expert. As for immortal venerables, he had only seen one of them. Moreover, he had only seen one of them. He hadn't even had a chance to speak to that person. Moreover, although the immortal venerable that the white-haired old man had seen was also an immortal venerable, he couldn't be compared to Wine Taoist at all. That person's cultivation base was only at the beginning of the immortal venerable realm, while Wine Taoist was already at the great perfection immortal venerable realm. He was only half a step away from stepping into the immortal emperor realm. Wine Taoist didn't feel the slightest bit happy after defeating the lightning with ease. On the contrary, he frowned slightly and looked at the crack in the sky. We have to hurry up. We have to evacuate today. Along with Wine Taoist's words, the immortal realm experts of the seventh realm came back to their senses and shouted, "Quick, get on the starship." They had to evacuate today. Otherwise, the lightning attacks would be more frequent tomorrow. Moreover, no one knew if there would be other changes tomorrow. Following the instructions of the experts of the seventh realm, the disciples of Human Emperor sect once again walked towards the starship. However, this time they were extremely obedient. What a joke! None of the disciples of Human Emperor sect had seen Wine Taoist's attack. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed that there was such a terrifying existence in this world. As they boarded the starship one after another, many disciples were discussing in low voices. Too strong. Did you see how that senior attacked just now? He's simply too strong. Of course. I heard from the elders that the senior seems to be an immortal venerable. Immortal sovereign realm. You don't know about this? Above the great saint realm is the immortal realm, and above the immortal realm is the immortal venerable realm. That senior is already at the immortal venerable realm. Moreover, the elder said that the senior is invincible even in the immortal venerable realm. I'm afraid his cultivation base has already reached the great perfection immortal venerable realm. Numerous disciples were discussing Wine Taoist. It was obvious that they were filled with awe and curiosity towards Wine Taoist because this was the first time they had come into contact with an immortal venerable expert. While the disciples of the imperial sect were boarding the seventh world's starship in an orderly manner, the cultivators of the other forces on the Runhuang continent also arrived one after another. However, when they arrived at the human emperor plane and saw the disciples of the human emperor sect boarding the starship in an orderly manner, their expressions changed drastically. They knew that things weren't going well, but there was nothing they could do about the current situation. They could only brace themselves, approach an immortal realm expert of the seventh world, and speak respectfully. Senior, we are the sect masters of the various major sects of the human emperor sect. Do you remember the quota that you mentioned earlier? Now that they remembered to ask for the quota, they didn't even care about it before. Upon hearing their words, the immortal realm expert said snappily, "There's nothing left. You all didn't want the quota that we gave you earlier, so we have given it to the human emperor sect." There's nothing left? Upon hearing this, the sect masters of the various major sects were stunned. There were hundreds of thousands of quota, and all of them were given to the human emperor sect? For a moment, everyone looked at the disciple of the human emperor sect and cursed inwardly. Damn it! Who would have thought that the quota that they gave up would be given to the human emperor sect in the end? However, in order to survive, they quickly looked at the immortal realm expert of the seventh world and pleaded with a pleading look. Senior, we were the ones who deserved to die. We were foolish. We know that we were wrong. Please give us a chance. However, it was too late for regret. Just as the sect masters of the various sects arrived, Li Qiu and the wine Taoist, who were in the sky, had already seen this scene. Li Qiu revealed a disdainful smile as he spoke. Everyone will reveal their true self in the face of death. But it's too late to regret it now. Let the mortal emperor sect talk to them themselves. In any case, all the spots are in the mortal emperor sect's hands now. If the mortal emperor sect is willing to give up some of them, then it has nothing to do with us. Taoist Wine spoke indifferently when he heard Li Qiu. He did not intend to interfere in this matter. Just as Wine Taoist said, there were only so many quotas. Previously, these people did not care about the Hachibra Senkai's words and did not want the quota. Now that all the quotas were given to the human emperor sect, they regretted it. Therefore, they directly let the human emperor sect talk to them. If the human emperor sect was willing to give up some of the quotas, Li Qiu and Wine Taoist would not say anything. In their opinion, it did not matter who it was as long as it was someone from the second wilderness. Li Qiu nodded slightly after hearing Wine Taoist's words. He then called the white-haired old man from the human emperor sect and said to him, "Chen Bai, the quota is now given to the human emperor sect. You can talk to them yourself." The white-haired old man's name was Chen Bai. When he heard this, he naturally understood what Li Qiu meant. To put it bluntly, Li Qiu and Wine Taoist were not willing to interfere in these small matters. They found it troublesome, so they simply left it to the people of the human emperor continent to solve. Chen Bai nodded respectfully after hearing Li Qiu's words. Yes. Chen Bai did not dare to do anything in front of Li Qiu and Wine Taoist. He nodded in response and then waved Li Qiu away. Only then did Chen Bai leave. He walked to the front of the sect leaders. When they saw Chen Bai, the sect leaders were stunned. However, they immediately cupped their hands and bowed. Elder Chen. Chen Bai could be considered the most senior person in the human emperor continent. He had a high prestige. Therefore, no matter who it was, they would be very respectful to Chen Bai. However, judging from the current situation, in the face of death, it was unknown how much Chen Bai's seniority and prestige could do. After all, in the face of death, who would care so much? Chapter 10. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1734. In the face of death, Chen Bai's prestige and qualifications were not worth mentioning at all. Of course, Chen Bai was known for being a person of virtue and prestige in the mortal emperor continent. He was fair and just in doing things. However, it was obviously impossible for him to give up the quota that he had already taken. Therefore, after facing the respectful greetings from the crowd, Chen Bai only nodded slightly, and then said indifferently, "Everyone, why have you all come here together?" Actually, everyone was well aware of the purpose of everyone's visit. Chen Bai had also purposely asked this question. Hearing this, the various sect leaders present exchanged glances with each other before opening their mouths to speak. Elder Chen, the human emperor continent is now in imminent danger. The quota for the Hachiba Senkai we want, I see. But I'm sorry, everyone is a little late. Now, the quota for our disciples has already been used up. Chen Bai interrupted before the person could finish his sentence. There was naturally no need to hide the current situation, so Chen Bai directly rejected everyone present. Hearing this, the sect leaders' faces instantly turned cold. That's right, they were all in the quasi-saint realm, and their cultivation was far inferior to Chen Bai's. If it were any other time, they would definitely not dare to offend Chen Bai. But now it was different. In the face of death, how could they care about other things? The quota for the Hachiba Senkai was already their last chance to survive, so no matter how much they had to take some. Their faces sank, and then one of them took the lead to speak to Chen Bai. His tone was no longer as respectful as before. Elder Chen, hundreds of thousands of quotas have been taken up by the human emperor sect. I'm afraid it's not appropriate to not give any chance to the other sects, right? His tone had become incomparably cold. Hearing this, the others also chimed in. That's right, the human emperor sect is eating the meat. Don't tell me you won't even leave us some soup? Elder Chen, we don't ask for much. How about the human emperor sect give up 50 quotas for each force? Everyone chimed in. Hearing this, a cold glint flashed in Chen Bai's eyes. Give up 50 quotas for each force? It might not sound like a lot, but one had to know that the total number of forces in the human emperor continent was at least 800, if not 1,000. How was this possible? Moreover, Chen Bai might have agreed if the wine Taoist hadn't given all the quotas to the mortal emperor sect. However, it had already been confirmed that the quotas would be given to the mortal emperor sect, so how could Chen Bai give them up for nothing? Humans were sometimes like this. They wouldn't feel anything if they lost something that didn't belong to them, but once they obtained something, they probably wouldn't want to lose it. It could be said that he had already swallowed the quota. It was absolutely impossible for Chen Bai to take it out at this time. Therefore, Chen Bai did not hesitate at all when he heard the crowd's words. He immediately replied coldly, "The quota already belongs to my human emperor sect. If there's nothing else, please leave." His words were already very clear. Hearing this, the various sect leaders' faces turned cold. Elder Chen, what do you mean by this? What if we don't leave? In order to survive, the crowd naturally could not just leave like this. Upon hearing these words, without any warning, Chen Bai immediately pointed his finger and instantly killed one of the sect leaders. After which, he coldly said, "If you don't leave, you'll die." Time was of the essence. Chen Bai was not in the mood to talk nonsense with these people. There was no way he would give up the quota. After Chen Bai made his move, the great sage from the human emperor sect also rushed over and stared coldly at the various sect leaders present. In order to survive, the human emperor sect naturally wouldn't talk about morality. Many disciples of the human emperor sect still boarded the starship in an orderly manner. Looking at this scene, the wine Taoist and Li Qiu had no intention of intervening. Previously, they didn't want the quota given to these forces. Now, they wanted to snatch it away. How could that be? Would the human emperor sect agree? In the face of life and death, no matter who it is, they will reveal their true side. The wine Taoist said after taking a sip of wine as he looked at the two opposing forces. In terms of strength, the human emperor sect was definitely stronger. There was no doubt about that. Moreover, the wine Taoist did not have the slightest bit of sympathy for the sect leaders of these forces. This was because they had already given them a chance before. It was they who chose to give it up and let the human emperor sect take advantage of it. Without paying attention to the confrontation between the two sides, the disciples of the human emperor sect continued to board the starship in an orderly manner. Seeing more and more disciples of the human emperor sect board the starship, the sect leaders of the major forces could no longer sit still. Since they were going to die anyway, why not take a gamble? Even if the difference in strength between them and the human emperor sect was huge, so what? Looking at Chen Bai and the other experts of the human emperor sect, one of the sect leaders shouted coldly, "Human emperor sect, you've gone too far. There are hundreds of thousands of quotas, and you want to fight alone? Even if we die today, we won't agree to it." "That's right, we won't agree to it even if we die," the sect leaders shouted angrily. Hearing this, a murderous intent flashed in Chen Bai's eyes. He said coldly, "Since that's the case, you can all go to hell." As soon as he finished speaking, the great sage of the human emperor sect attacked together. It could be said that it was a one-sided massacre. In the face of the attack of the great sage of the human emperor sect, the sect leaders of the major forces had almost no power to fight back. They were killed directly on the spot. After killing these people, the disciples of the human emperor sect quickly boarded the starship. At this time, nearly 100 starships of the seventh realm were full of people. Each starship was fully loaded and could not add more people. Everything was ready. Li Qiu immediately ordered, "Let's go." The situation of the human emperor continent and the entire second wilderness was getting more and more dangerous. They could not stay for long. Following Li Qiu's order, nearly 100 starships of the seventh realm slowly rose into the sky. As the starships rose into the sky, the hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor sect were saved. However, looking at the billions of living beings on the human emperor continent below, they had no chance at all. The crack in the sky was still expanding, and lightning still fell from the sky from time to time. There was no chance of survival. These people could only be destroyed along with the human emperor continent and the entire second wilderness. On the deck, Wine Daoist and Li Qiu could vaguely see that from all over the human emperor continent, pairs of desperate eyes were staring at the starships of the seventh realm slowly rising into the sky. In their eyes, the starships were their hope. Unfortunately, their only hope was getting farther and farther away from them. Chapter 11. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1735. Nearly 100 starships of the seventh realm rose slowly and soon disappeared into the sky. The situation of the second desolate land was becoming more and more unstable. It could be destroyed at any moment. As a result, the Wine Daoist and the others did not dare to stay here for too long. Otherwise, if they did not leave before the second desolate land collapsed, it would be very dangerous. Of course, when Wine Taoist and the others evacuated, they also sent a message to Xiao Chen, asking him to leave at once. After receiving Wine Taoist's message, Xiao Chen did not waste any time. He immediately led many geniuses of the seventh realm and rushed out of the second wilderness. Although Xiao Chen had not collected all the cultivation resources of the entire human emperor continent, he did not have enough time. Compared with treasures, his life was naturally more important. It would be embarrassing if he did not have the life to spend the money when the time came. Many experts of the seventh realm, including Xiao Chen and the hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor sect, left the human emperor continent and the second wilderness together. As for the others, they could only wait for death. Even if the saints and quasi-sage great masters among them could leave the human emperor continent with their own strength or by starships, they would never be able to escape the second wilderness. Ordinary spaceships were too slow to leave the second wilderness. However, the 100 or so spaceships from the seventh world were sending messages in the dark starry sky, shocking the disciples of the human emperor sect who were on them. Starships were not unfamiliar to them. There were many starships in the human emperor sect. However, compared with the starships of the seventh realm, anyone could see that the two were not at the same level. There was no comparison at all. Of course, there was no comparison. The cost of any one of the starships of the seventh realm was comparable to the cost of hundreds of ordinary starships. They sped all the way to the exit of the second wilderness at their fastest speed. At the same time, only half a day after Wine Taoist and the others left. Above the human emperor continent, there were also countless starships that soared into the sky. These starships belonged to various sects of the human emperor continent. At this time, they did not dare to look back and fled from the human emperor continent. The instinctive desire to survive made countless warriors of the human emperor continent want to escape from the human emperor continent because the current human emperor continent seemed to have fallen into hell. The crack in the sky completely split open, and bolts of lightning struck down from the sky without any reservation. At the same time, cracks appeared on the ground. Volcanoes erupted, and the sky fell and the earth cracked. Such a terrifying scene had scared many warriors of the human emperor continent out of their wit. They had never seen such a scene before. The sky was torn apart and the earth began to fall apart. The originally vast Renhuang continent seemed to have been forcibly disintegrated at this moment. It began to shatter into small pieces of land. It continued to split apart until it finally disappeared. Along with the disappearance of the land, the people who lived on it were naturally killed. Everyone wanted to escape. They thought that they would be safe once they escaped from the human emperor continent. Little did they know that the outcome would not change. The collapse of the continent would be followed by the fall of the entire second wilderness. Therefore, no matter how these people escaped, their fate was almost sealed. On the human emperor continent, countless creatures would be killed in an instant. In the face of such a doomsday, no human could resist. No matter how high one's cultivation was, as long as it was not at the level of Luoli and the others, there was no way one could resist in the face of such a doomsday. Even immortal emperors like Luoli and the others did not dare to say that they could escape unscathed in the face of such a doomsday. It was not that tragic because everything happened in an instant, almost in the blink of an eye. Before you could even react, you had already been obliterated. Consciousness, body, and soul dissipated almost at the same time. It was almost as if you had evaporated from the world. There were no tragic screams, no bloody scenes, but in an instant, you no longer existed in this world. The human emperor continent began to collapse, and at the same time, the other continents were the same. The Wine Taoist and the others were on a starship and were about to fly out of the second wilderness. On nearly 100 starships, hundreds of thousands of disciples of the human emperor sect had been rescued. However, they did not have the slightest bit of excitement and joy after surviving the disaster. This was because their hometown had been completely destroyed. Perhaps their relatives and friends on the human emperor continent had also been killed. Therefore, how could they be happy? In the overcrowded starship, many disciples of the human emperor sect were silent. Some of them were even shedding tears. In the face of this scene, the elders of the human emperor sect were also silent. What happened in the second wilderness had made them feel as if half of their hearts had died. Like the others, several young men were sitting in a circle beside Chen Bai and the great sage of the human emperor sect. These people were the most outstanding among the disciples of the human emperor sect. They had already reached the sage realm great perfection at such a young age. Even if they were not considered the top among the geniuses of the seventh realm, they could definitely reach the middle level. They had supreme talent, but at this moment, their expressions were very downcast. After a long while, the young man who was the leader strode to Chen Bai and bowed respectfully. Ancestor, was all of this really caused by the will of the heavenly way? This young man was called Hao Yun. He was the #1 disciple of the human emperor sect. He was extremely talented, and was once a famous genius in the human emperor continent and even the entire second wilderness. However, at this moment, Hao Yun's eyes were no longer as bright as before. There were only doubts, disappointment, and of course, deep hatred in them. Hearing this, Chen Bai raised his head and looked at him. He wanted to say something, but he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. After a long silence, Chen Bai finally nodded slightly and said, "It should be." Chen Bai was not sure that the destruction of the second wilderness was caused by the will of the heavenly way, but his answer had obviously given Hao Yun the answer he wanted. After hearing Chen Bai's words, the disappointment and bewilderment in Hao Yun's eyes vanished completely. Instead, it was replaced by an extremely dense hatred. Hao Yun hated. He hated the will of the heavenly way for doing this. Even if the will of the heavenly way had given up on them, why did it have to destroy the second wilderness? Didn't it know that by doing so, countless creatures in the second wilderness would be destroyed? Chapter 12. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1736. Hao Yun was originally a disciple of a large clan in the human emperor continent. Hao Yun knew that his parents and relatives were probably all dead in the second wilderness. Just because of a single thought from the heavenly way in the second wilderness, countless creatures in the entire second wilderness had to die. Why? Hao Yun had never understood why all the creatures in the second wilderness had to die like ants just because of a single thought. Now Hao Yun understood. It was because of strength, because the will of the heavenly Tao had such strength. In the eyes of the will of the heavenly Tao, the numerous living beings in the second desolation were like sand in a desert. They were insignificant. Without the second wilderness, what was the use of the creatures in the second wilderness? It was better to die in glory than to live in dishonor. If he couldn't have it, the Hachibra Senkai wouldn't have it either. The hatred in his heart had reached its peak. The reason why Hao Yun had boarded the starship of the seventh world was because Chen Bai and the others had forced him. With Hao Yun's personality, if his family had no chance of survival, he would definitely not live alone. However, how could Chen Bai and the others let such a good seedling like Hao Yun die just like that? As a result, they brought him onto the starship of the seventh world without any explanation. A complicated expression flashed across Chen Bai's eyes when he sensed the monstrous hatred that erupted from Hao Yun's body. He wanted to console her, but he did not know what to say. In the end, he could only sigh. After Chen Bai sighed, Hao Yun fell silent for a moment. Then, he said firmly, "Ancestor, I want to join the Hachibra Senkai." Join the Hachibra Senkai? Chen Bai wasn't the only one who was surprised. Even the people around, including the great sage of the imperial sect, looked at Hao Yun in surprise. In fact, Hao Yun's thoughts were very simple. The heavenly way in the second wilderness had destroyed the entire second wilderness and killed Hao Yun's entire family. Therefore, Hao Yun would join the Hachibra Senkai because only the Hachibra Senkai could contend against the entire eighth wilderness. One day, when Hao Yun had the strength, he would definitely avenge his family. The group of imperial sect's great holy sovereigns were surprised. However, Hao Yun had already made up her mind to join the eighth desolate immortal world before anyone could reply. After watching Hao Yun leave, one of the human emperor sect's great sage emperors looked bitterly at Chen Bai and said, "Master, let him go. If Hao Yun can join the Hachibra Senkai, it will be his good fortune." However, Chen Bai said. Chen Bai didn't stop Hao Yun from wanting to join the Hachibra Senkai. In Chen Bai's opinion, if Hao Yun could really join the Hachibra Senkai, it would be his good fortune. After all, if he could cultivate in the Hachibra Senkai, it would definitely be thousands of times better than in the human emperor sect. However, in Chen Bai's opinion, it wouldn't be easy for Hao Yun to join the Hachibra Senkai. In the human emperor sect, Hao Yun's talent was definitely the best. However, if he were to join the Hachibra Senkai, it would be a different story. In the Hachibra Senkai, there were many people who were more talented than Hao Yun. There were also many people who had a higher cultivation than him. It was like the difference between the head of a chicken and the tail of a phoenix. In the human emperor sect, Hao Yun was the head of the chicken. However, if he were to join the Hachibra Senkai, Hao Yun would become the tail. Even so, in Chen Bai's opinion, the tail of a phoenix was far better than the head of a chicken. No matter what, even if he was only the tail, he had successfully joined the ranks of a phoenix and was no longer a pheasant. Moreover, if Hao Yun could really join the Hachibra Senkai, it would be a good thing for the human emperor sect. After all, the human emperor sect would definitely follow the Hachibra Senkai to the first wilderness. When that time came, if they wanted to gain a foothold in the unfamiliar environment of the first wilderness, if they could obtain the help of the Hachibra Senkai, even if it was just a little, it would be enough for the human emperor sect to benefit immensely. If Hao Yun joined the Hachibra Senkai, it would be tantamount to drawing a line between the human emperor sect and the Hachibra Senkai. Everything would depend on Hao Yun's luck. Chen Bai sighed in his heart. He was determined to join the Hachibra Senkai, not for anything else but for revenge. However, when Hao Yun returned to his previous seat, the other young men who had been sitting with Hao Yun looked at him and asked, "Senior brother Hao Yun, do you really want to join the Hachibra Senkai?" "That's right." Hao Yun nodded solemnly in response to everyone's questions. "I must join the Hachibra Senkai, no matter what." After making up his mind, Hao Yun finally waited for an expert of the immortal realm from the 7th realm. Without any hesitation, Hao Yun immediately went up to this person and bowed respectfully. Seeing Hao Yun suddenly appear in front of him and block his way, the expert of the 7th realm did not get angry. Instead, he asked calmly, "What's the matter?" In fact, the experts of the 7th realm treated the people of the human emperor sect quite well. At least, there was no bullying. Of course, this was also because of the Wine Taoists' special order. Hearing this, Hao Yun immediately said, "Senior, I want to join the Hachibra Senkai." This was the first time Hao Yun was so close to an expert of the immortal realm, so he was definitely nervous. However, for the sake of revenge, Hao Yun forced himself to say this. Hearing this, the expert of the 7th realm sized Hao Yun up with interest. He was young and had the cultivation of the Saint realm at the great attainment level. Not bad. The expert of the immortal realm smiled and said softly, "If the younger generation wants to join the Hachibra Senkai, it's useless to come to me. You'll need the heirs of each realm. Our Hachibra Senkai is divided into 8 realms. Which one do you want to join?" Hao Yun didn't know much about the Hachibra Senkai. Hearing this, Hao Yun was stunned. However, he quickly asked, "Senior, what about you? May I ask which realm you're from, Senior?" "Me? Haha, we're all from the 7th realm. If you want to join the 7th realm, you can find the heir of our realm when we get there. As long as he agrees, you can join the 7th realm." Hearing this, the expert of the immortal realm laughed heartily and turned to leave. However, before he could take 2 steps, Hao Yun's voice came from behind him. She was nervous and scared. After all, if she kept pestering an expert of the immortal realm, if he got angry, Hao Yun would definitely suffer. It wouldn't be strange if she was slapped to death. "Senior, who is the heir of the 7th realm? How should I find him?" Suppressing the nervousness and fear in his heart, the expert of the 7th realm was patient. He didn't even turn his head when he heard Hao Yun's words. "You'll naturally see him when the time comes. But let me remind you that the heir of the 7th realm has a bad temper. Be smart when the time comes." Chapter 13. Collecting Monthly Votes Recommending. Chapter 1737. You'll see him then. With that, the immortal realm cultivator from the 7th realm left. Hao Yun clenched her fists tightly and said with determination in her eyes, "The heir of the 7th realm. I'll definitely join the Hachibra Senkai." If you wanted to join the 8-Baron immortal world, you either had to get the approval of the Sector Lord or the heirs. However, the Sector Lord usually didn't care about the younger generation. As long as the heirs agreed, there would be no problem. Of course, as for the older generation, the heirs wouldn't care about them either. At most, they would recommend them. In the end, the Sector Lord would make the decision personally. Hao Yun returned to her seat. She was very curious about the heir of the 7th realm that the Immortal Realm cultivator had mentioned. She didn't know much about the Hachibara Senkai, but she had heard a little about the Hachibara Senkai's heir. She only knew that the Hachibara Senkai's heirs were all young, but their cultivations were extremely terrifying. All of them had reached the Immortal Realm. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if someone like Hao Yun stood at the peak of the younger generation in the Human Emperor continent, then the Hachibara Senkai's heirs, like Shao Chen, were already at the peak of the younger generation in the entire 8-Baron world. Apart from the 2nd Baron world, Shao Chen was definitely at the top of the younger generation in the entire 8-Baron world. Hao Yun was very curious about what kind of person the heir of the 7th realm was. Although she didn't get any substantial information from the Immortal Realm cultivator, Hao Yun was still keenly aware that when he talked about the heir of the 7th realm, the Immortal Realm cultivator's eyes unconsciously revealed a trace of reverence and even a trace of fear when he spoke about the heir of the 7th realm. Yes, it was fear. The Immortal Realm cultivator from the 7th realm was a little afraid of Shao Chen, but it made sense. After what Shao Chen had done in the 7th realm, who below the Immortal Realm wouldn't be afraid of him? Even some immortal venerables were extremely afraid of Shao Chen. After all, Shao Chen had killed more than one immortal venerable. They were looking forward to seeing the heir of the 7th realm. Just like that, the starships of the 7th realm quickly flew toward the exit of the 2nd wilderness. One day later, nearly 100 starships from the 7th realm arrived at the exit of the 2nd wasteland because they were traveling at full speed this time. They rushed out of the exit of the 2nd wasteland and landed on the Black Palace of the 7th world. In just one day, the 2nd wasteland had turned into hell. Countless continents collapsed and spatial storms raged. It was as if they had reached the critical point of destruction. However, no matter what happened to the 2nd desolate land, it had nothing to do with them anymore. They had successfully reached the Black Palace in the 7th realm. What happened to the 2nd desolate land could no longer threaten them. Nearly 100 starships slowly landed on the main square of the Black Palace in the 7th realm. Then, disciples of the Human Emperor sect walked out of the starships one after another. Everyone looked around curiously at the majestic and domineering Black Palace in front of them. Of course, no one dared to do anything here. They all knew what this place was. Not only them, but even the great sage of the Human Emperor sect didn't dare to do anything. Following the arrival of the crowd, many figures quickly appeared from the Black Palace. Some of them looked young, some were white-haired old men, and some were middle-aged men with strong bodies. Although none of them exuded the slightest bit of aura, the people of the Human Emperor sect still felt immense pressure in the face of these people. Ordinary disciples didn't know, but the great sage like Chen Bai knew very well that although these people didn't seem to be dangerous, they were all Immortal Realm cultivators at the very least. They were extremely nervous, but fortunately, the experts of the 7th realm didn't mean to make things difficult for them. They weren't arrogant at all. It should be known that the higher one's status was, the less he had the habit of bullying others because there was no need to do so. In the eyes of the experts of the 7th realm, the disciples of the Human Emperor sect weren't important at all. Therefore, there was no need to make things difficult for them to show the strength of the 7th realm. Moreover, the strength of the 7th realm was never shown by making things difficult for them. It was originally very strong. Old drunkard, how is it? Where are the heirs of Kunlun and the others? A middle-aged man landed in front of Wine Taoist and Li Qiu and asked with a smile. As they were talking, another starship landed slowly. It was the starship that Xiao Chun and the others were on. Xiao Chun and the others had returned safely. As the starship landed, the young geniuses of the seventh realm walked down from the deck one after another. Among the crowd, Hao Yun's eyes were fixed on them, trying to find Xiao Chun. Unfortunately, Hao Yun didn't know who the heirs of the seventh realm was. Just as Hao Yun was extremely anxious, she suddenly saw the immortal realm expert who had spoken to her before. Without thinking, Hao Yun immediately ran to him. At this moment, the immortal realm expert was talking to the other people of the seventh realm. It was indeed a bit abrupt. Hao Yun went to him directly and said nervously, "Senior, I." The people who were talking were suddenly interrupted by Hao Yun's voice. Immediately, one of them snorted unhappily. "Where did this little girl come from? Don't you know any manners? Can't you see that we're talking?" The immortal realm expert's temper was obviously much more impatient. Hearing this, Hao Yun's face turned ghastly pale. Fortunately, the expert who had spoken to her on the starship smiled and said, "Brother, it's just a kid. Don't scare him. This kid wants to join the Hachibara Senkai. He's probably here to ask about the heirs of Kunlun." Since this person had helped her out, the others didn't make things difficult for Hao Yun anymore. Then, this person glanced at Hao Yun and pointed at the starship that Xiao Chen and the others were on with a smile. "There, that's the heir of the seventh realm, Xiao Chen." Hao Yun looked in the direction that this person was pointing at and saw a demonic young man in white standing proudly on the deck. He had white hair and blood-red eyes. Hao Yun had always thought that she was pretty, and she had countless admirers in the Renhuang sect. However, it was only when she saw Xiao Chen that she realized that there was actually such a good-looking man in the world. Hao Yun seemed to be unable to move her eyes away from him. She stared at Xiao Chen and couldn't help but murmur softly, "You're so handsome." This is the heir of the seventh realm, Chapter 14. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1738. This was the seventh time she had seen someone like the Hachibara Senkai's heir. She murmured to herself. Ever since she was young, Hao Yun had never taken any of her peers seriously on the Renhuang continent. However, at this moment, when she faced Xiao Chen, Hao Yun found that an invisible pressure was constantly sweeping towards her. Xiao Chen was definitely not older than Hao Yun, but in Hao Yun's eyes, Xiao Chen was like a mountain. She felt helpless. It was somewhat laughable. If someone had told Hao Yun before this that there was someone among the younger generation who could make her feel powerless and unable to resist, Hao Yun would have scoffed. But now, after facing Xiao Chen for real, Hao Yun softly felt the gap between the two of them. Xiao Chen did not do anything special. His aura was also restrained to the extreme. But even so, Hao Yun still felt a great pressure. As if sensing Hao Yun's gaze, Xiao Chen, who had been talking to Yu Shujin, suddenly turned his eyes. Through the crowd, his gaze fell directly on Hao Yun. Being stared at by that pair of demonic blood-red eyes, Hao Yun froze on the spot, as if she had been struck by a spell. With just a glance, Xiao Chen looked away. He did not know Hao Yun. As Xiao Chen looked away, Hao Yun secretly let out a sigh of relief. But in that instant, Hao Yun realized that her back was actually drenched in sweat. As if sensing Hao Yun's change, the seventh world's immortal realm expert beside her smiled. "What? You don't have the courage to go up? If you don't even have the courage to speak to our heir, then don't even think about joining the seventh world." With that, the immortal realm expert patted Hao Yun's shoulder gently. Whether Hao Yun had the courage to face Xiao Chen was something she had to overcome. If she did not even have the courage to face Xiao Chen, then there was no need to talk about joining the seventh world. With that, without waiting for Hao Yun's reply, the immortal realm expert from the seventh world left with his companions. Hao Yun stood there alone, looking at Xiao Chen from afar. She took a deep breath. That's right. If she did not even have the courage to face Xiao Chen, then there was no need to talk about joining the seventh world. Clenching her fists, Hao Yun braced herself and walked towards Shao Chen. As Hao Yun walked towards Shao Chen, the starship of the Eighth World's Yi Shao slowly landed. The prides of the Eighth World also walked down from the starship. Yi Shao was among them. As soon as he returned, Yi Shao went directly to Shao Chen's side and said with a complicated expression, "Shao Chen, how are things on your side?" "It's the same," Shao Chen said calmly. The operation to save the second desolate land had ended in failure. However, it could not be helped. This matter was indeed beyond the ability of the Hachibara Senkai. Moreover, the people of the second desolate land were extremely resistant to the Hachibara Senkai. This was also one of the problems. It was not hard to imagine that even at the moment of death, there were still many people in the second desolate land who believed that the second desolate land will of the heavenly way would come to save them. In their eyes, the Hachibara Senkai was a group of thieves from the beginning to the end. Hearing Shao Chen's words, Yi Shao shook his head helplessly. He wanted to save the second desolate land, but they did not give him the chance at all. However, it was useless to say anything now. Just as Yi Shao came to Shao Chen's side and the two of them were talking, Hao Yun also came to Shao Chen. However, when he was dozens of meters away from Shao Chen, Hao Yun was stopped by a young genius from the seventh realm. "What's the matter?" The genius's attitude was rather mild. He was not arrogant just because Hao Yun was a disciple of the human emperor sect. Hearing this, Hao Yun did not dare to be impudent at all. After all, in the seventh realm, his status, talent, and strength were all nothing. The arrogance he had in the human emperor sect before should be restrained. Bowing respectfully to the genius, Hao Yun said, "Senior brother, I want to see Shao Chen's heir." "Want to see the heir?" Hearing this, the genius looked Hao Yun up and down and said, "Wait a moment." With that, he walked to Shao Chen. When he came to Shao Chen, the genius said to Shao Chen, "Heir, a disciple of the human emperor sect wants to see you." Hearing this, Shao Chen glanced at Hao Yun, who was waiting not far away, and nodded. Seeing this, the genius brought Hao Yun to Shao Chen. Different from before, he was now standing in front of Shao Chen. The two were less than 2 meters apart. At this moment, Hao Yun was even more nervous. Lowering his head, he did not dare to look directly at Shao Chen. Seeing this, Shao Chen spoke first. "What is it?" His voice was calm and indifferent. Hearing this, Hao Yun gathered his courage and stuttered, I want to join the seventh realm." Hao Yun really wanted to join the seventh realm, because only here could he obtain the power he wanted. Seeing this, Shao Chen's expression did not change. Then he asked, "Join the seventh realm?" "Why?" "Revenge. My family died this time. I want revenge. The seventh realm can give me more cultivation resources." Hearing this, Hao Yun raised his head and looked directly at Shao Chen for the first time. The hatred in his heart made Hao Yun want to become stronger. Seeing the thick hatred in Hao Yun's eyes, Shao Chen seemed to see himself in the past. Hadn't he been like this when he'd first joined the seventh realm? At this moment, Hao Yun was so similar to Shao Chen in the past. They both had thick hatred in their hearts. Their families had died because of the will of the heavenly way. Shao Chen looked at Hao Yun and did not speak for a long time. Facing Shao Chen's gaze, Hao Yun's back was already soaked in sweat. Shao Chen's blood-red eyes seemed to see through him. Hao Yun had never felt this kind of pressure, not even when facing Chen Bai. After looking at Hao Yun for a while, Shao Chen took out a storage ring from his storage ring and threw it to Hao Yun. "Take these cultivation resources. If you can break through to the quasi-saint realm before arriving at the first wilderness, I'll let you join the seventh wilderness." Hao Yun's cultivation was now at the saint realm great fulfillment. Hearing Shao Chen's words, Hao Yun was stunned at first, but then he nodded heavily. "Thank you, heir." Shao Chen did not reject Hao Yun. Instead, he gave Hao Yun a lot of cultivation resources. As for whether he could break through to the quasi-saint realm, It would depend on his own efforts and talent. However, it would take at least a month to reach the first wilderness from here. Hao Yun still had a high chance of breaking through. Chapter 15. Collecting monthly votes recommending. Chapter 1739. Hao Yun's talent was definitely not bad. Although she could not be considered as the top in the 7th realm, she was at least above average. It could be seen that Hao Yun sincerely wanted to join the 7th realm. Moreover, Hao Yun's experience was very similar to his in the past. Therefore, Xiao Qin also agreed to Hao Yun's request. As for breaking through to the quasi-saint realm, it should not be difficult for Hao Yun. Moreover, she was supported by the cultivation resources that Xiao Qin had given her. Starships returned one after another. The warriors who were rescued from the second desolate land were also temporarily settled down in the palaces and starships of the Hachibara Senkai under the arrangements of the Hachibara Senkai's expert. The rescue work was basically completed. Although only a few million people were rescued, which was just a drop in the ocean compared to the entire second desolate land, there was no other way. This was the best that the Hachibara Senkai could do. After everyone had settled down, the situation in the second desolate land had reached its final juncture. All the continents in the second desolate land had fallen apart. The violent void storm swept across the entire second desolate land. At the same time, the terrifying lightning was also rampant. Almost half of the living beings in the second desolate land had died. The fate of those who were still persevering was almost predetermined. Under such a sweeping doomsday, there was no way for them to survive. Countless starships were flying frantically in the second desolate land. They wanted to escape from the second desolate land and survive. Unfortunately, such a struggle was useless. The doomsday swept across the entire second desolate land. Countless living beings died every second. With the arrival of the true doomsday of the second desolate land, the will of the heavenly way slowly opened their eyes in all directions. The destruction of the second desolate land was a foregone conclusion. Within 3 days, the entire second desolate land would become a land of death. There would be no living beings and no trace of spiritual energy. Well, since the second desolate land has been destroyed, it's time for us to withdraw. The will of the heavenly way of the third desolate land said faintly after glancing at everyone present. The second desolate land had been completely destroyed. There was no point in staying here. Hearing this, the will of the heavenly way nodded slightly and did not say anything more. They had personally destroyed a desolate land and killed tens of billions of living beings. However, there was not the slightest hint of sadness on the faces of the wills of the heavenly Tao. Perhaps in their eyes, the lives of the countless living beings in the second wilderness were nothing. They did not know how to feel sad at all. Perhaps as the wills of the heavenly Taos, they did not know what sadness and pity were from the day they were born. Since their goal had been achieved, the will of the heavenly way of the second desolate land decided to temporarily retreat. As for the will of the heavenly way of the second desolate land, he naturally returned to the seventh desolate land with the will of the heavenly way of the seventh desolate land. The experts of the 8th desolate land retreated one after another. As for the Hachibara Senkai, everyone could feel the destruction of the second desolate land in the next 2 days. The warriors who had escaped from the second desolate land were all grieving. Many of their relatives and friends were probably dead by now. Facing the death of their relatives and friends, they had no way to stop it. They could only watch helplessly. This was the end of the world. Even Luoli and the other sector lords could not stop it, let alone them. On this day, the sector lords also gave the order to retreat. Many spaceships and the majestic palace slowly flew out of the second desolate land and rushed towards the first desolate land. The first desolate land was the headquarters of the Hachibara Senkai. It was a place that was truly under the control of the Hachibara Senkai. The people there no longer believed in the will of the heavenly way. Instead, they believed in the Hachibra Sunkai and believed in themselves. The first desolate land was the place where the Hachibra Sunkai was born. It was also the only place that was not under the control of the will of the heavenly way. Everyone was very curious about the first desolate land, including Shao Chun. He had heard from Li Qiu and the others that the first desolate land was a very magical place. In the first desolate land, there was no heaven's punishment. When warriors broke through the sage realm, quasi-sage realm, or great sage realm, there would be no heaven's punishment. The reason was very simple. The first desolate land no longer had the will of the heavenly way. Naturally, there was no heaven's punishment. Because of this, the cultivation environment in the first desolate land was actually much better than the other desolate. The number of experts was also higher. This was the first time that Shao Chun had heard of a world without the will of the heavenly way. As the spaceships and palaces of the Hachibra Sunkai flew towards the first desolate land, everyone returned to their normal lives. As for the second desolate land, although many people were sad, it could not be helped. The second desolate land no longer existed. The first desolate land had been destroyed. From now on, only the 7 desolates were left in the 8 desolates world. The place where the second desolate land used to be had become a land of death. There were no living creatures and no trace of spiritual qi. As usual, Shao Chun spent every day cultivating. On this day, after a day of cultivation, Shao Chun received an invitation from Guan Hong to go to his cave residence for a drink. With Hong Lian and Yi Shao, the 3 of them went directly to Guan Hong's cave residence in the Second World Palace. Fu Rue, Quan Feng, Chiu Ru, Lu Shao, and the rest of the Hachibra Sunkai's heirs were all there. Everyone sat down. Soon, maids served the food and wine. This was not the first time they had gathered for a drink. This time, the heirs of Kunlun heirs had a chance to interact with each other. Other than the conflict between Fu Rue and Shao Chun when they first met, everyone got along well. Not only were they destined to have few friends, but there were also not many people in the entire 8 desolates who were qualified to sit with them on equal footing. Naturally, no one would pay attention to those they didn't think highly of. Only those who were also heirs of Kunlun's field were worthy of their attention. They did not talk about the second desolate land. After all, it was a foregone conclusion. There was no point in talking about it. They drank and chatted, talking about meaningless topics. However, in the midst of this chat, Chiu Ru, who was always cold and reserved, suddenly looked at Shao Chun and Hong Xiu. "We're about to reach the first desolate land. Hong Xiu, don't you plan to tell Shao Chun about Mu Fan?" Hong Xiu's face darkened at the mention of Mu Fan again. On the other hand, Shao Chun, who was beside her, drank a mouthful of wine without any change in his expression. He was not worried at all, as if it had nothing to do with him. Chapter 16. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1740. When Chiu Ru suddenly mentioned Mu Fan, Hong Xiu's face instantly turned gloomy. As for Shao Chun, he had an indifferent attitude. He continued to drink and eat, without the slightest bit of worry. Seeing that Shao Chun had no reaction at all, Chiu Ru opened her mouth and said, "Aren't you curious about the relationship between Mu Fan and Hong Xiu at all?" Faced with Chiu Ru's question, Shao Chun took a sip of wine. Instead of answering, he asked, "Why should I be curious?" With regards to Mu Fan, Shao Chun could see some clues from the changes in everyone's expression. He could also guess that there must be some relationship between him and Hong Xiu, but so what? Shao Chun didn't know who Mu Fan was, nor was he interested in knowing him. As for his relationship with Hong Xiu, Shao Chun had no interest in it at all. Originally, he didn't know how to deal with his relationship with Hong Xiu. How could Shao Chun care too much about these things? Shao Chun wasn't like other men. Although they said that they weren't interested in this woman, their bodies were very honest. Especially when it came to matters related to this woman, they were incomparably concerned. Since he wasn't prepared to accept Hong Xiu, then he shouldn't meddle in her affairs. Moreover, he shouldn't show how gentle he was, because that was purely a sign of illness. If there was a way, Xiao Chen would even let Hong Xiu move out of his cave residence. Unfortunately, this wasn't possible. He wouldn't take the initiative to show any concern for Hong Xiu, because Xiao Chen hadn't thought about how to deal with the relationship between him and Hong Xiu. Seeing Xiao Chen's indifferent look, a hint of loneliness flashed in Hong Xiu's eyes. Hong Xiu knew that Xiao Chen had been deliberately distancing himself from her. Even until now, although Xiao Chen didn't dislike Hong Xiu following by his side, he had never shown the slightest bit of concern and gentleness towards Hong Xiu. The relationship between the two of them was at most friends. At least, that was what Xiao Chen showed. Hearing Xiao Chen's reply, Qiu Ru was stunned for a moment. Then, she said in a bad mood, "I really don't know what Hong Xiu sees in you. However, I think you need to know about Mu Fan's matter. Because even if you don't look for him, he will come looking for you." Qiu Ru didn't care if Xiao Chen was listening to her and was about to tell him about Mu Fan. Seeing this, Hong Xiu begged, "Qiu Ru, you lass, you'll have to tell him sooner or later. You know Mu Fan's personality. Telling him will allow him to be prepared." Hong Xiu obviously didn't want Qiu Ru to talk too much about Mu Fan, but Qiu Ru felt that it was necessary to let Xiao Chen know about this. Hearing Qiu Ru's words, Hong Xiu's expression was complicated, but she didn't stop her because Qiu Ru was right. She should tell Xiao Chen about Mu Fan. Qiu Ru turned to Xiao Chen again and said coldly, "This time, only the people from the First Realm didn't come to the battle with the 8 barons. The First Realm's Realm Master is called Mu Tai. He is Mu Fan's father and Hong Xiu's father. He used to be husband and wife with the Red Lotus Realm Master. Mu Tai was Mu Fan's father and Hong Xiu's father. In this way, Mu Fan and Hong Xiu were biological siblings. Mu Fan was Hong Xiu's biological brother. However, did you think that they had a good relationship just because they were biological siblings? Obviously not. Since young, Mu Fan had shown great talent. Because he was Mu Tai's son, he was designated as the heir of the First Realm. His talent was outstanding and his personality was somewhat cold. For some unknown reason, perhaps it was because of the matter between Mu Tai and Hong Lian, Mu Fan had always hated Hong Lian and Hong Xiu ever since he was young. Especially for his sister, Hong Xiu, Mu Fan felt that she was a disgrace to him. Therefore, since young, Mu Fan had made things difficult for Hong Xiu more than once. "Good sister, I won't kill you, but I will take away everything around you." This was what Mu Fan had said to Hong Xiu when they were young. Later on, it was true. As long as Hong Xiu had something she loved, Mu Fan would destroy it at all costs. When she was young, Hong Xiu had raised a demonic beast. When Mu Fan found out about it, he immediately killed it. When she grew a little older, Hong Xiu had a few good friends by her side. However, without exception, they were all killed by Mu Fan. Because of this, even though Hong Xiu was the little princess of the 8th realm and everyone seemed to be respectful to her, one could clearly sense that she didn't have any friends in the 8th realm who could talk to her about everything. Everyone kept a certain distance from her. No wonder Xiao Chen hadn't realized that Hong Xiu had any good friends after interacting with her for so long. If there was one, it could only be Yi Xiao. Yi Xiao was Hong Xiu's best friend. He had always played the role of Hong Xiu's brother, but he wasn't her real brother. The reason why Yi Xiao could survive despite being so close to Hong Xiu was because Yi Xiao was also an heir. His strength wasn't much weaker than Mu Fan's, so Mu Fan couldn't do anything to him. However, many things had happened between Yi Xiao and Mu Fan. Mu Fan had ambushed Yi Xiao more than once, and his methods could be said to be unscrupulous. In the most dangerous time, Yi Xiao had almost died. If Hong Lian hadn't arrived in time, Yi Xiao would have been killed by Mu Fan. Mu Fan had said that he wanted everything around Hong Xiu, and he had done it. He didn't even let go of Yi Xiao, who was an heir. It could be said that he was crazy. As for why Mu Fan did this, no one knew. No one knew why he hated Hong Xiu so much and why he would treat his own sister like this. However, perhaps it was because Mu Fan had taken everything away from her when she was young, so Hong Xiu had a natural fear of Mu Fan. This wasn't because she was afraid that Mu Fan would kill her, but because she was afraid that Mu Fan would take away the things she loved. Thinking about it, even Yi Xiao had almost died in Mu Fan's hands. What about the others? They probably wouldn't be able to escape. Qiu Ru told Xiao Chen the truth about what had happened between Mu Fan and Hong Xiu. Hearing this, Xiao Chen would have some reaction, but who would have thought that after hearing this, Xiao Chen's expression didn't change at all, and he continued to drink and eat. Seeing Xiao Chen like this, Qiu Ru said unhappily, "Xiao Chen, did you hear what I said?" "I heard it, but so what?" Hearing this, Xiao Chen replied indifferently, "So what?" Hearing this, Qiu Ru was furious. She looked at Xiao Chen, and her eyes were filled with anger. You, translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Chapter 1741. Qiu Ru had already told Xiao Chen everything, but Xiao Chen still looked indifferent. Naturally, Qiu Ru was very unhappy about this. In the Hachibra Senkai, just like the various sector lords, some sector lords were very kind due to their personalities, while others were very eccentric. Therefore, it was hard to tell which sector lord was stronger in terms of combat power, but there was a rough ranking of the degree of danger. Due to their personalities, there was a ranking of the degree of danger between the various sector lords. Therefore, it was the same for the heirs. Actually, just like the various sector lords, the heirs of the Hachibra Senkai had not engaged in any life-and-death battles, so it was hard to say how strong or weak the heirs were. However, due to their personalities, there was a rough ranking of the heirs in terms of danger. Among them, Mu Fan was undoubtedly the most dangerous of the Hachibra Senkai heirs. There was no doubt about this, and there was no debate about it. Qiu Ru looked at Xiao Chen with anger in her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she suppressed the anger in her heart and said, "Xiao Chen, do you really not understand, or are you just pretending? Mu Fan is a madman. Given your relationship with Hong Xiu, he will definitely not let you off when you go to the first wilderness. With Mu Fan's temper, he would definitely attack Xiao Chen. There was no need to talk about whether he dared or not. After all, Mu Fan had even dared to kill Yi Xiao, and it was not the first time he had done so. Qiu Ru's purpose was to warn Xiao Chen to be careful, or to avoid contact with Mu Fan as much as possible. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen did not seem to appreciate it at all. Qiu Ru was very unhappy with Xiao Chen's attitude. However, just as Qiu Ru's voice fell, Yi Xiao, who was at the side, laughed without a care. "Alright, why are you worried about him? Mu Fan is a lunatic. Do you think that Xiao Chen is easy to deal with?" Other than Hong Xiu, Yi Xiao was the person who knew Xiao Chen the best. Yi Xiao was not too worried about going to the first wilderness. After all, they were all heirs. Who would be afraid of who? Furthermore, Xiao Chen wasn't someone who was easy to deal with. It was very clear that if Xiao Chen were to go crazy, he wouldn't be any worse than Mu Fan. It was just that the two of them had different personalities. Frankly speaking, Mu Fan would do anything to achieve his goals. As for Xiao Chen, he preferred to be straightforward and didn't like to play meaningless tricks. It could be said that one of them was secretly crazy, while the other was openly crazy. However, without exception, both of them were people who didn't care about the consequences at all. After hearing Yi Zhao's words, everyone present nodded slightly. They all thought about how Xiao Chen had embarrassed Fu Rui when they first met. Indeed, compared to Mu Fan, Xiao Chen wasn't easy to deal with. "It seems that there will be a good show in the first wilderness this time," Fu Rui said with a smile. Xiao Chen wasn't afraid of Mu Fan, and Mu Fan would definitely make a move on Xiao Chen. As such, it was inevitable that the two of them would clash. In the face of everyone's discussion, Xiao Chen didn't say anything. He just drank and ate alone. On the other hand, Hongxiu's face didn't look very good after talking about Mu Fan. Obviously, Mu Fan had left too much of a shadow in Hongxiu's heart. However, Xiao Chen didn't intend to say anything about it. Moreover, what could he say in such a situation? Comfort Hongxiu and let her know that he was a gentleman? Then, he couldn't give her any promises? Since he couldn't give her too much, then he shouldn't provoke her. At least, that was what Xiao Chen thought in his heart. At least, that was how it was before he truly accepted Hongxiu. Xiao Chen didn't care about Mu Fan at all. Therefore, everyone stopped talking about Mu Fan and drank and chatted. Soon, it was late at night. After the banquet that night, Xiao Chen and Hongxiu returned to their cave residences. However, to Xiao Chen's surprise, Hongxiu took the initiative to move out the next day. She no longer pestered Xiao Chen like before. Hongxiu knew what she meant. She was afraid that she would be implicated. Although Hongxiu knew that with Xiao Chen's strength, he wasn't afraid of Mu Fan, as the saying goes, don't be afraid of a thief stealing, but be afraid of a thief remembering. It was impossible for Mu Fan to kill Xiao Chen in an open and above-board manner. However, it was easier to dodge an open spear than an arrow in the dark. Moreover, Mu Fan was such a person. If he couldn't do it openly, he would definitely do it in the dark. Moreover, as long as someone was remembered by Mu Fan, they wouldn't have a good ending. For example, Yi Xiao almost lost her life in Mu Fan's hands. Mu Fan was definitely an extremely difficult person to deal with. Therefore, in order not to implicate Xiao Chen, Hongxiu took the initiative to move out of Xiao Chen's cave residence. Anyway, there were still chances in the future. As long as she kept a certain distance from Xiao Chen in the first wilderness and didn't let Mu Fan remember Xiao Chen, it would be fine. As for leaving the first wilderness, wasn't it the same? Knowing what Hongxiu was thinking, Xiao Chen didn't say a word about Hongxiu moving out of his cave residence. He also didn't have any intention of persuading her to stay. Xiao Chen didn't have the slightest change because of Hongxiu's departure. However, the little girl, Luan Luan, was different. She kept clamoring for Hongxiu to come back. After spending some time together, Luan Luan was also very fond of Hongxiu. However, after acting coquettishly a few times, she saw that Xiao Chen was still indifferent. Luan Luan quickly understood that her father wouldn't ask Hongxiu to come back. There was no other way. Luan Luan didn't dare to disobey her father's decision. She also didn't mention asking Hongxiu to come back. However, every few days, Luan Luan would take the initiative to look for Hongxiu. Regarding this, Xiao Chen didn't stop her too much. Hongxiu moved out. For a time, only Xiao Chen, Luan Luan, and the wine Taoist were left in the cave residence. However, the wine Taoist went out to drink every day. Xiao Chen almost didn't even see him. Therefore, for a time, the cave residence was deserted. He didn't know what to feel in his heart. Perhaps it was because he wasn't used to it. However, even if he wasn't used to it, what could he do? He couldn't give Hongxiu anything. It was rare to have peace. In the following days, Xiao Chen once again immersed himself in bitter cultivation. More than 20 days passed in a row. On this day, Hao Yun, who had been in closed-door cultivation since he came to the 7th Realm Palace, finally broke through to the quasi-sage realm according to Xiao Chen's request. After breaking through, Hao Yun was qualified to join the 7th Realm. Xiao Chen didn't go back on his words. When Hao Yun just broke through, Yu Shujin took the initiative to find him and gave him the identity token that symbolized the 7th Realm's Heaven's Pride. At this point, Hao Yun was finally considered a member of the 7th Realm. Chapter 18. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1742. Xiao Chun did not pay too much attention to Hao Yun's matter. To Xiao Chun, Hao Yun was just someone who had a similar experience as him. It was not enough to attract Xiao Chun's attention. As usual, Xiao Chun was immersed in his cultivation every day. However, on this day, Luan Luan cried in front of Xiao Chun. "Father, I saw Aunt Hong crying. Are you really not going to take a look?" It had been more than half a month since Hong Xiu moved out of his cave residence. Perhaps Hong Xiu was angry because he did not try to persuade her to stay. Therefore, during this period of time, Hong Xiu did not take the initiative to look for Xiao Chun. However, Luan Luan would go to Hong Xiu's place to play from time to time. Luan Luan naturally did not understand the feelings between men and women. When he heard her words, Xiao Chun simply said, "Children should not meddle in the affairs of adults." Obviously, he was not interested in explaining these things to a child. However, when she heard Xiao Chun's words, Luan Luan pouted angrily and said, "If you don't care, then don't care. Father doesn't care about Luan Luan anymore. I'm going to tell Grand Master." After saying that, Luan Luan turned around and ran away. Looking at Luan Luan's back, Xiao Chun helplessly shook his head and smiled bitterly. To be honest, Xiao Chun did not know if he had been too heartless towards Hong Xiu. After all, Hong Xiu had truly treated him well. However, Xiao Chun did not seem to have done anything for Hong Xiu. A trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. However, very quickly, the confusion in his heart turned into a sigh. Since I can't give her a future, why should I continue to be with her? Xiao Chun had not taken his revenge, and his family was still waiting for him to be resurrected. How could he be in the mood to care about these things? He no longer thought about Hong Xiu. In the next few days, Xiao Chun continued to cultivate as usual. However, since Luan Luan ran away in anger last time, she no longer cared about him. She even moved to live in Wine Daoist's courtyard. This made Xiao Chun speechless. Xiao Chun discovered that Luan Luan was really spoiled. In the seventh realm, everyone doted on her. His father, Hong Xiu, and Grand Master, Wine Daoist, were all obedient to Luan Luan. Only Xiao Chun would scold Luan Luan from time to time. The little girl was still angry with him, but Xiao Chun did not care. He thought that things would get better after a while. The days passed peacefully. On this day, Luan Luan, who had been angry with him for a few days, suddenly rushed to Xiao Chun with a face full of anger. She pouted her small mouth as if she had suffered a great grievance. She looked at Xiao Chun and said, "Father, do you not want Luan Luan anymore?" "No." Xiao Chun was taken aback when he heard that. What was the little girl up to this time? He did not understand, but he still shook his head and said, Xiao Chun had already treated Luan Luan as his own daughter, so naturally, he would not abandon her. Luan Luan's adorable eyes were filled with tears as she said pitifully, "Don't worry, Luan Luan. Then why haven't you come to find me for so many days?" These days, Luan Luan was indeed angry with Xiao Chun. However, the little girl's thoughts were very simple. She thought that Xiao Chun would definitely take the initiative to find her. She did not expect that after so many days, Xiao Chun did not have the slightest intention of looking for Luan Luan. She missed Xiao Chun very much. The little girl could not help but come to find him herself. Hearing this, Xiao Chun smiled helplessly. He immediately stepped forward and hugged Luan Luan. "Father is busy with cultivation. Moreover, it seems that you are angry with Father first, isn't it?" "I don't care. I am a child. Father is an adult. How can you lower yourself to the level of a child?" Luan Luan said. Hearing Luan Luan's words, Xiao Chun was speechless. Where did this little girl learn these things from? He felt that Luan Luan was becoming more and more mischievous. He did not know what she was thinking all day. However, after being comforted by Xiao Chun, the little girl quickly stopped crying and smiled. Luan Luan naturally could not be angry with Xiao Chun. In her eyes, Xiao Chen was the closest person in the world. Although her grandmaster and Aunt Hong were good to her, in Luan Luan's opinion, there was still a gap between them and Xiao Chen. In Luan Luan's heart, her father's position was irreplaceable. As the saying goes, children are fickle. Very soon, the little girl began to play in the courtyard as if nothing had happened. Seeing the happy smile on Luan Luan's face, Xiao Chen's eyes revealed a rare trace of gentleness. Shuru Baiwa Lingyao Tianyue. Look, this little girl is my daughter. She is also your daughter. There will be a day when I will revive you all and reunite your family. If Shuru and the others were still by his side, it would be the happiest moment for Xiao Chen. He could not help but think of Qin Shuru and the other two girls. However, at this moment, Xiao Chen's eyes did not have much sorrow. Instead, they were replaced with an incomparably determined expression. This was because Xiao Chen firmly believed that he could revive them. No matter how difficult it was, Xiao Chen had to do it. Moreover, Luan Luan's existence gave Xiao Chen unprecedented hope. During this period of time, Xiao Chen naturally knew that Qin Shuru and the others' remnant souls had recovered greatly under Luan Luan's nourishment. Although there was still a long way to go before they could completely recover, at least they were in the process of recovering. Seeing hope, Xiao Chen firmly believed that he could succeed. It could be said that he had reconciled with Luan Luan and her father. 3 days later, they finally arrived at the entrance of the first wilderness. The entire first wilderness was also enveloped by a huge formation. There was only one entrance for people to enter and exit. The Black Palace of the Seventh Realm slowly flew into the second wilderness. At the same time, Yi Xiao took the initiative to find Xiao Chen. The two of them sat in the pavilion in the courtyard and looked at Xiao Chen. Yi Xiao said with a smile, "We're here. Brother Xiao Chen, this is your first time in the first wilderness, right? This is a world that is said to have no heaven and earth. It is not controlled by the will of the heavenly way here." They had finally arrived at the first wilderness. Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled slightly. At the same time, he was curious. He wanted to see with his own eyes what this so-called world that was not controlled by the will of the heavenly way looked like. He wanted to see how it was different from the other wasteland. He was full of expectations for the first wilderness. However, after hearing this, Yi Zhao's eyes flashed with a complicated look. After hesitating for a while, he finally spoke to Xiao Chen. "Brother Xiao Chen, I don't know if I should ask this question. However, if I don't ask, I'll feel really bad. So, please don't mind. What are your plans with junior sister Hongxiu? I can see that junior sister Hongxiu really likes you." During this period of time, junior sister Hongxiu's mood has been very bad. So, I want to ask, regarding Hongxiu, what do you think, brother Xiao Chen? Chapter 19. Collecting monthly votes recommending. Chapter 1743. Yi Xiao looked at Xiao Chen with a complicated expression. Although Yi Zhao's personality was extremely frivolous, he truly loved and cared for Hongxiu. Ever since Hongxiu moved out of Xiao Chen's cave residence to prevent Mu Fan from attacking Xiao Chen, Hongxiu was obviously in a bad mood. Yi Xiao naturally noticed this. He thought that Xiao Chen would be angry at his question, but Xiao Chen did not. A strange look flashed across his eyes, and Xiao Chen said plainly, "I can't give her anything, so I don't want to hold her back. But junior sister really likes you," Yi Xiao said when he heard Xiao Chen's words. Anyone could see that Hongxiu really liked Xiao Chen. However, Xiao Chen did not say anything and chose to remain silent. Xiao Chen did not want to say much about Hongxiu. Moreover, Xiao Chen did not know what to say. Seeing that Xiao Chen had fallen into silence, Yi Xiao did not continue to dwell on this issue. The Seventh Realm's Black Palace flew slowly in the first wilderness. After a day, it landed on a huge continent. This continent was called the Immortal Realm Continent, and it was the headquarters of the Hachibara Senkai. Almost all the warriors living on the Immortal Realm continent were members of the Hachibara Senkai. Of course, they were not official members. They could only be considered as unofficial members, similar to the odd jobs disciples in the sect. Everyone knew that the Hachibara Senkai's requirements for official members were very high. The cultivation of the experts of the older generation had to be at least at the Immortal Realm, and the talent of the younger generation had to be the best of the best. After returning to the Immortal Realm continent, everyone was finally home. In the center of the Immortal Realm continent, there were 8 towering mountains. These 8 mountains could be considered as the Hachibara Senkai's headquarters. The 7th Realm's Black Palace slowly landed on one of the mountain peaks. This mountain peak was called the 7th Peak, which was why it was called the Sea Region. It belonged to the 7th Realm. The 8 mountain peaks seemed to have formed a mysterious array, causing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to be extremely rich. Even the sky was drizzling. Don't underestimate these drizzles. These raindrops contained extremely rich spiritual chi and were called spiritual rain. The 100 peaks represented the 8 realms of the Hachibara Senkai. After the Black Palace of the 7th Realm slowly descended on the 7th peak, the warriors rescued by Second Desolation began to move. Of course, they couldn't live here. They couldn't even live in the Immortal Realm. There were 8 continents in the first wilderness. The cultivators from the second wilderness would be arranged to live in the other continent. Of course, the cultivators from the same sect would be arranged to live in the other continents. Xiao Chen didn't have to worry about the transfer and settling of the warriors of Second Desolation. This was his first time coming to the Immortal Realm continent. Xiao Chen walked out of the cave residence with Yi Xiao and came to the main square. The drizzle in the sky didn't seem to stop. Xiao Chen was amazed by the richness of the spiritual chi here. This was indeed a fairyland. It was probably the wish of all the warriors in the world to be able to cultivate here. Xiao Chen had seen many wonderful places for cultivation, but so far, he had never seen any place that could compare to this place. What do you think? The 8 Immortal Mountain is not bad, right? Yi Xiao asked with a smile as he walked beside Xiao Chen. The 8 Immortal Mountain was the name of these 8 mountains. It was also where the Hachibara Senkai's sect was located. Hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiao Chen nodded gently and said, "Well, it's very good. I guess it's difficult to find another place like this in the entire 8 Desolation world." The 8 Immortal Mountain was indeed a rare place. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yi Xiao smiled proudly and said, "Of course. The 8 Immortal Mountain is the #1 place in the 8 Desolation world." The two of them pondered as they walked. At the same time, the warriors from the other realms returned to their respective mountain peaks. This time, everyone returned to First Desolation. They would probably rest for a period of time and wouldn't leave for a while. Following the return of the powerhouses from the 7 realms, the entire 8 Immortal Mountain became lively again. One could see a magnificent palace towering above each mountain peak. Each palace represented one of the realms of the Hachibara Senkai. Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao didn't pay too much attention to it. While the two of them were strolling idly, Xiao Chen and Yi Xiao suddenly spotted Hong Xiu. However, at this moment, there was a gloomy young man in black clothes in front of Hong Xiu. Mu Fan. Upon seeing the black-clothed young man, Yi Xiao's eyes flashed with a cold glint as he said coldly. The black-clothed youth was Mu Fan. At this moment, in the main square, Mu Fan was blocking Hong Xiu's path. It could be seen that Hong Xiu's face was extremely ugly at this moment. Her face was filled with anger and a trace of fear. On the other hand, Mu Fan wore an ice-cold smile on his face and said unhurriedly, "My good sister, you've been gone for so many years. As your brother, I really want to die. Mu Fan, get out of my way." Hong Xiu didn't look happy at all and shouted coldly. Unfortunately, Mu Fan was unmoved by Hong Xiu's shout and continued to sneer. "Why? We haven't seen each other for so long and you're asking me to get lost as soon as we meet?" As he spoke, Mu Fan took a step forward and whispered into Hong Xiu's ear in a voice that only the two of them could hear. My good little sister, after being away for so many years, have you made any new friends? If you have, you must tell me because I will personally send him to hell. Hong Xiu's body trembled uncontrollably. At this moment, Hong Xiu suddenly saw Xiao Qin and Yi Xiao walking over slowly. When she saw Xiao Qin, Hong Xiu's eyes instantly turned red and she looked extremely pitiful. Hong Xiu was really afraid when facing Mu Fan. This fear had nothing to do with her strength. It was a habit since she was young. Since she was young, Mu Fan could be said to be her nightmare. At this moment, Hong Xiu only wanted to hide behind Xiao Qin because this was the only way she could feel safe. Unfortunately, Xiao Qin didn't have any intention of attacking even though a cold glint flashed in his eyes. Instead, it was Yi Xiao who shouted, Mu Fan, don't go overboard. Yi Xiao naturally wasn't afraid of Mu Fan. In fact, Yi Xiao's killing intent towards Mu Fan was extremely dense. However, when Mu Fan heard this, he turned around and looked at Yi Xiao with a cold smile. There will be a day when I will personally kill you, Yi Xiao. End of Chapter 20. Brothers, if you have a monthly ticket or a recommendation ticket, please support me. Thank you. Chapter 1744. I really can't take it anymore. I'll take a day off today. Brothers, please forgive me. Sword Master of 8 Desolations, taking a day off. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 1745. Yi Xiao was filled with murderous intent towards Mu Fan. On the other hand, Mu Fan was the same towards Yi Xiao. Murderous intent flashed in Mu Fan's eyes as he spoke coldly to Yi Xiao. Hearing this, Yi Xiao snorted coldly and immediately went to Hong Xiu's side, obviously intending to protect her. Ever since she was young, everything around Hong Xiu, including her friends, had been taken away by Mu Fan. Only Yi Xiao was able to escape from Mu Fan's murderous hands because of her own strength. However, judging from the current situation, Mu Fan had never given up on killing Yi Xiao. As long as there was a chance, Mu Fan would definitely kill Yi Xiao immediately, not for any other reason but because of the relationship between Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu. The two of them stared at each other without backing down. Facing Mu Fan, Yi Xiao's heart could be said to be on high alert. This was because this guy was definitely someone who did not play by the rules. As long as he could achieve his goal, he would use any means. He stood in front of Hong Xiu without backing down. Mu Fan was the first to withdraw his gaze. In this place, under such circumstances, he was not confident that he could kill Yi Xiao. Hence, there was no need for him to take action. Mu Fan turned to look at Xiao Qin and did not say anything. He only said a few words to Hong Xiu and then left. My good sister, you will be staying in the first desolation for quite some time. The two of us have plenty of time. As soon as he finished speaking, Mu Fan left without giving Hong Xiu a chance to reply. Following Mu Fan's departure, Hong Xiu's expression turned ugly. There was anger, hatred, and at the same time, fear. Whenever she faced Mu Fan, Hong Xiu's heart would always be filled with fear. Ever since she was young, Mu Fan had been Hong Xiu's nightmare. When Xiao Qin saw Mu Fan for the first time, he did not say anything. Of course, this was also because of Yi Xiao's presence. Xiao Qin was certain that Hong Xiu would not be in any danger. Otherwise, Xiao Qin would not have watched Hong Xiu get into trouble without doing anything. After Mu Fan left, Yi Xiao glanced at Hong Xiu, who was in a daze. He sighed softly and then turned to Xiao Qin. Brother Xiao Qin, junior sister and I will return to the 8th realm first. Let's meet again when we have time. Okay. Hearing Yi Xiao's words, Xiao Qin nodded gently. Seeing this, Yi Xiao left with Hong Xiu. However, before she left, Hong Xiu looked at Xiao Qin pitifully. Facing Hong Xiu's gaze, Xiao Chen did not say a word. He knew that Hong Xiu needed comfort now, especially his comfort. However, even if Xiao Chen comforted Hong Xiu now, what would happen next? What could Xiao Chen give Hong Xiu? Without saying anything, he watched Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu leave. Then, Xiao Chen returned to his cave residence alone. He had lost interest in strolling around. Over the next few days, the Hachibra Senkai met with the warriors who had been rescued from the second wilderness and arranged for them to continue to establish their sects in the first wilderness. Xiao Chen did not interfere with the arrangement of the warriors in the second wilderness at all. Xiao Chen did not need to worry about these things. Of course, Xiao Chen was not interested in this. He continued to cultivate every day. A few days passed, but Hong Xiu did not come to Xiao Chen. Perhaps she was afraid that Mu Fan would come to make trouble for Xiao Chen. However, on this day, Xiao Chen had just finished a day of cultivation. In the evening, Yu Shujin took the initiative to look for Xiao Chen. She wanted him to go to the Seven Realms continent tomorrow. The Seven Realms continent was one of the 8 continents in the first wilderness. It happened that the Seven Realms continent was under the jurisdiction of the Seventh Realm. The major sects on the Seven Realms continent actually followed the lead of the Seventh Realm. As the heir of the Seventh Realm, it was necessary for Xiao Chen to go to the Seven Realms continent in person. Of course, this was only Yu Shujin's suggestion. As for whether Xiao Chen was willing or not, it was up to Xiao Chen. After all, Yu Shujin did not have the authority to order Xiao Chen. Hearing Yu Shujin's words, Xiao Chen pondered for a moment. Then, he did not refuse and nodded slightly. "Help me arrange it." Anyway, he would not leave the first wilderness in a short period of time. There was no problem in going to the Seven Realms continent. Seeing that Xiao Chen had agreed, Yu Shujin also nodded her head respectfully. To go to the Seven Realms continent, Xiao Chen planned to take Luan Luan with him. The little girl had complained to him many times that Xiao Chen had less time to accompany her. This time, going to the Seven Realms continent was his territory. It was not a big deal to take Luan Luan with him. Moreover, according to Yu Shujin, in the entire first wilderness, experts above the Immortal Realm were gathered in the Immortal Realm continent. As for the other continents, there were no experts above the Immortal Realm. Therefore, with Xiao Chen's strength, there was no danger. It was a good opportunity to take Luan Luan out to play. This would prevent her from getting sick from staying in the Seventh Realm. After making up his mind, Xiao Chen immediately ordered someone to call Luan Luan. She ran all the way to the courtyard and saw Xiao Chen. Luan Luan happily rushed into Xiao Chen's arms and affectionately called out, "Daddy." Facing Luan Luan, Xiao Chen's mood couldn't help but improve. This little girl was indeed very cute. Xiao Chen gently stroked the little girl's hair and said with a smile, "Daddy is going to the Seven Realms continent tomorrow. Luan Luan, do you want to go with Daddy?" Yes, Luan Luan wants to go." Hearing this, the little girl didn't hesitate at all. She immediately nodded and clamored to go with Xiao Chen. In this regard, Xiao Chen smiled and nodded. But soon, Luan Luan seemed to have thought of something strange. She blinked her big eyes and asked expectantly, "Daddy, will Aunt Hong come with us?" Ever since Hong Xiu moved out of her cave mansion, Luan Luan missed her very much. She couldn't help it. When she wasn't around, Hong Xiu spent most of her time with the little girl. Moreover, Hong Xiu had always wanted Luan Luan to acknowledge her as her mother. Unfortunately, the little girl was very clever and didn't agree. With the temperament of a child, it was natural for her to miss her mother. However, facing Luan Luan's expectation, Xiao Chen shook his head and said, "Aunt Hong won't go." Hong Xiu had already returned to the Eighth Realm. Naturally, Xiao Chen couldn't ask her to go with him. Hearing this, Luan Luan's eyes flashed with a touch of loneliness, but it quickly dissipated. Although Luan Luan was a little disappointed that Hong Xiu didn't go with them, she was already very happy to be able to go out and play with her daddy. As for yesterday's 4 chapters, I will make up for it after the Mid-Autumn Festival. Thank you for your support, brothers. In addition, I wish my brothers a happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Chapter 1746. From Luan Luan's point of view, being able to go out and play with Xiao Chen was the happiest thing in the world. That night, the little girl was extremely excited. The night passed by quickly. By the next morning, Luan Luan had already washed up with the help of 2 maids. She kept urging Xiao Chen to hurry up. "Father, why aren't we leaving yet? When are we going to leave?" The little girl was already impatient. Facing Luan Luan's constant urging, Xiao Chen could only helplessly smile and say, "Don't worry. Once everything is arranged, we can leave." Xiao Chen had asked Yu Shujin to arrange for them to go to the 7th Realm continent. Therefore, Xiao Chen didn't know when they would leave. He had to wait for Yu Shujin's notice. Xiao Chen gestured for Luan Luan to calm down, but how could the little girl be quiet at a time like this? There was nothing he could do about it. With Luan Luan beside him, he was unable to cultivate. Fortunately, Xiao Chen had no choice but to play with Luan Luan. Although he wasn't related to Luan Luan by blood, Xiao Chen did treat Luan Luan as his own daughter after spending some time together. It was indeed a very happy thing to play with his daughter. Xiao Chen didn't have to wait for long. After about half an hour, Yu Shujin came and told Xiao Chen that everything was ready and they could leave at any time. Hearing that they could finally leave, Luan Luan immediately became excited. In response, Xiao Chen smiled helplessly and said, "Then let's go." The little girl couldn't wait for a moment. Naturally, Xiao Chen could only comply with her wishes. Under Yu Shujin's lead, Xiao Chen brought Luan Luan and 2 of her maids. The group quickly arrived at the main square of the 7th Realm's Black Palace. At this time, there was already a small starship and more than 10 young geniuses of the 7th Realm waiting for them. Everyone naturally wanted to follow Xiao Chen to the 7 Realms continent. Without wasting any time, they directly boarded the starship and slowly flew away from the 7th peak. Perhaps she was tired from playing in the morning, but as soon as they left the Immortal Realm continent, Luan Luan fell asleep. Seeing this, Xiao Chen handed Luan Luan over to the 2 maids. Then he went to find Yu Shujin and asked her about the 7 Realms continent. According to Yu Shujin, other than the Hachibra Senkai, there were many other factions in the First Wilderness. These factions naturally followed the Hachibra Senkai's lead. Although they were not official members of the Hachibra Senkai and could only be considered as vassal forces, many of their ancestors had broken through to the Immortal Realm and joined the Hachibra Senkai after so many years. Therefore, the relationship between the Hachibra Senkai and these major factions could be said to be very close. It was almost to the extent that it was difficult to distinguish one from the other. The First Wilderness was the Hachibra Senkai's true headquarters. It was also the result of countless years of hard work by the Hachibra Senkai. Unlike the other desolates, none of the living beings in the first desolate believed in the will of the heavenly Tao. This was similar to how the living beings in the other desolates believed that the 8 desolates' immortal world was a bunch of thieves. In the First Wilderness, the Hachibra Senkai had absolute prestige. The 7 Realms continent was the continent of the 7th Realm. The sects, families, and other major factions on the continent were all vassals of the 7th Realm. It was precisely because of this relationship with the 7th Realm that Yu Shujin suggested that Xiao Chen go to the 7 Realms continent. After all, as the heir of the 7th Realm, Xiao Chen did indeed need to represent the 7th Realm in some occasions. It would be a joke if the heir of the 7th Realm did not even meet his own people. Of course, this was also Luo Li's intention. In short, Xiao Chen's purpose in going to the 7 Realms continent was very simple. He wanted to meet the leaders of the major sects on the 7 Realms continent and get to know them. At the same time, he wanted to officially inform them that Xiao Chen had become the heir of the 7th Realm. After all, Shao Chun had never been to the Seven Realms continent before. After introducing the situation of the Seven Realms continent to Shao Chun, Yu Shujin added, "The human emperor sect has also chosen the Seven Realms continent." Back then, many warriors of the Second Wilderness were settled on the continents of the First Wilderness. Chun Bai, the leader of the human emperor sect, took the initiative to apply to go to the Seven Realms continent. He also made it clear that the human emperor sect was willing to become a vassal sect of the Seventh Realm. Of course, Chun Bai naturally had his reasons for doing so. First of all, he wanted to take root on the first continent. Naturally, the Hachibra Senkai was the best choice. Secondly, Hao Yun was now a genius of the Seventh Realm and had successfully entered the Seventh Realm. In this way, among the 8 realms of the Hachibra Senkai, the human emperor sect's best choice was naturally the Seventh Realm. The experts of the Seventh Realm did not refuse Chun Bai's request. After all, the Seven Realms continent was very large. It was not inferior to the seventh continent of the Seventh Wilderness where Shao Chun had been. Therefore, it was not a problem to arrange a human emperor sect. A few days ago, the human emperor sect had already set off for the Seven Realms continent. Now they should be choosing the location of their mountain gate. Hearing that the human emperor sect was also in the Seven Realms continent, Shao Chun only nodded slightly and did not say much. They did not encounter any trouble or danger along the way, but this was normal. After all, they were in the First Wilderness. Who would be foolish enough to have any ideas about the Hachibra Senkai? They arrived at the Seven Realms continent very smoothly. Looking at the magnificent continent below, Luan Luan was very happy, as if she had found a treasure. Looking at the happy expression of the little girl, Shao Chun also smiled. Then, he turned to Yu Shujin and said, "Where are we going next?" Although he had learned some things about the Seven Realms continent from Yu Shujin was undoubtedly the one who knew more about the Seven Realms continent. Therefore, Shao Chun naturally let Yu Shujin make the arrangements. Hearing Shao Chun's inquiry, Yu Shujin obviously had a plan in mind. She immediately said, "In the Seven Realms continent, there should be 5 great sage sects, including the human emperor sect. Among them, the Taibai sect is the strongest. Why don't we go directly to the Taibai sect?" The Taibai sect was the strongest, stronger than the human emperor sect. Therefore, according to Yu Shujin, the first stop should be the Taibai sect. Hearing Yu Shujin's words, Shao Chun had no objection. He nodded and said, "Okay, let's go to the Taibai sect first." On the surface, Shao Chun's expression did not change, but in his heart, he could not help but sigh. It seemed that the strength of the First Wilderness was indeed far superior to the other barons. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 1747. Shao Chun sighed inwardly at the strength of the First Wilderness. Although this was the first time he came to the First Wilderness and he only had a general understanding of the situation, it was not difficult to see that the strength of the First Wilderness far exceeded that of the other wastelands. Think about the status of the human emperor sect in the Second Wilderness. It was the only great sage sect in the human emperor continent. The human emperor continent itself was one of the 7 continents of the Second Wilderness. In the Second Wilderness, the human emperor sect was strong enough to dominate the human emperor continent. However, after coming to the First Wilderness, its strength was nothing in the Seven Realms continent, let alone dominating the Seven Realms continent. From this, it could be seen that the number of experts in the First Wilderness was significantly greater than that of the other wasteland. Of course, this was directly related to the situation in the First Desolate Land. In the First Desolate Land, there was no will of the heavenly way. Warriors did not need to experience the so-called heavenly punishment when breaking through. As a result, the success rate of breaking through was naturally higher. At least one thing was certain: and that was that no one would be punished by the heavenly punishment when breaking through. Perhaps it was because of the great strength of the first wilderness that the Hachibra Senkai was able to compete with the other 7 wastelands for so many years. The starship flew above the 7 realms continent. According to Yu Shujin's arrangement, they soon arrived at the Taibai sect. The Taibai sect was located on a small island in the middle of a lake. The lake was very large. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was no different from the sea. The island in the middle of the lake was very large. There were magnificent jade palaces on the island. Beautiful and fairy-like buildings rose from the ground. Moreover, because it was located in the middle of the lake, it was shrouded in thick fog all year round. As a result, it was like a fairyland. Of course, there was no way to compare it with the 8 peaks where the Hachibra Senkai was located. There was a huge gap between the two. Xiao Chen had already seen all kinds of treasured lands. Therefore, for Xiao Chen, the Taibai sect in front of him did not arouse any surprise or interest at all. He stood on the deck with an indifferent expression. Yu Shujin and the other 7th Realm's Heaven's Prides clustered around him. As for Luan Luan, she was taken care of by the 2 maids. The starship slowly landed on the main square. At the same time, there were 36 the great sage of the Taibai sect waiting on the main square. As the most powerful great sage sect in the 7 realms continent, there were 36 the great sage in the Taibai sect, which was twice as many as the human emperor sect had. However, at this time, the 36 great saint emperors of Taibai sect were all extremely respectful to the starship that was slowly descending from the sky. They did not dare to act presumptuously. Yu Shujin had already sent a message to the Taibai sect, so they knew who had come to the Taibai sect this time. It was a big shot that the Taibai sect couldn't afford to offend. As the starship slowly landed, Xiao Qin slowly walked down surrounded by the 7th Realm's Heaven's Prides. Of course, he was still holding Luan Luan's hand. In the face of the great sage of the Taibai sect, Xiao Qin was very calm. However, Luan Luan's bright big eyes looked around curiously. Looking at Xiao Qin, a white-haired old man with a sage-like demeanor took the initiative to come in front of Xiao Qin. He respectfully saluted Xiao Qin and said, "Lu Zongzi greets the heir of the great sage of the Kunlun realm." The old man's name was Lu Zongzi. He was the master of the Taibai sect. Xiao Qin slightly nodded in response to Lu Zongzi's salute. No need to be so polite. Xiao Qin wasn't arrogant. However, even so, Lu Zongzi didn't dare to overstep his bounds in front of Xiao Qin. Lu Zongzi didn't know how Xiao Qin had become the heir of the 7th realm, nor had he heard the rumors about Xiao Qin. However, seeing Yu Shujin standing respectfully behind Xiao Qin, he knew that Xiao Qin hadn't become the heir of the 7th realm for no reason. At least, Xiao Qin was stronger than Yu Shujin. There was no doubt about that. In the Hachibra Senkai, one couldn't become the heir of a realm just by relying on connections. It wasn't hard to see this from Hong Xiu. As Hong Lian's daughter, Hong Xiu wasn't the heir of the 8th realm. The only reason was that her talent wasn't as good as Yi Zhao's. One had to have the talent and combat ability to suppress everything in order to become the heir of a realm. He stood respectfully in front of Xiao Qin, followed by the rest of the Taibai sect's great saint emperors. After a brief exchange of greetings, Xiao Qin slowly walked into the main hall of the Taibai sect, accompanied by the crowd. Xiao Qin sat in the main seat in the hall. Luan Luan sat beside Xiao Qin. Clearly, she couldn't sit still anymore. She looked around in boredom. Sensing the change in Luan Luan, Xiao Qin smiled. What? You can't sit still anymore? Yes, this is so boring, father. Hearing this, Luan Luan nodded her head honestly. With Luan Luan's age, she indeed wasn't interested in such occasions. Seeing this, Xiao Qin smiled. Then he looked at Lu Zongzi and said, "Sect leader Lu, this is my daughter Xiao Luan. I heard that the Taibai sect has great scenery. I wonder if I could trouble you to take her around." Luan Luan was Xiao Chen's daughter. She didn't have a surname before, so she naturally followed Xiao Chen's surname now. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Lu Zongzi hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands. "You're too polite, heir. I'll arrange it right away." Since Xiao Luan was Xiao Chen's daughter, Lu Zongzi naturally didn't dare to neglect her. Moreover, the person responsible for taking care of Luan Luan couldn't be chosen casually. In the end, Lu Zongzi specially asked a female Tai sect member, the Great Sage, to take Xiao Luan to the Tai sect to play. Having the Great Sage accompany someone to play was definitely a first in the Tai sect. However, with Luan Luan's status, she clearly deserved this treatment. Soon, accompanied by the Great Sage and 2 maids, Luan Luan left the main hall. However, before leaving, Xiao Chen still opened his mouth to remind her. "Luan Luan, be obedient. Don't be naughty or daddy will be unhappy." Xiao Chen already had some understanding of Luan Luan's character. Although this little girl didn't have the unruly character of those young ladies from big families, she was very clever and very naughty. Therefore, it was necessary to remind her. In the face of Xiao Chen's warning, Luan Luan obediently nodded in response. Then, she let Xiao Chen hug her and kiss her on the cheek. After that, she got up and skipped away. Looking at Luan Luan's back, Xiao Chen smiled knowingly. This little girl only knew how to please him. Of course, Xiao Chen also liked Luan Luan's way of doing things. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1748. Xiao Chen really doted on Luan Luan. Moreover, with Xiao Chen's current status, he could let Luan Luan run amok. However, Xiao Chen didn't want Luan Luan to become such a person. Xiao Chen had always hated bullying others, being unruly and willful, and bullying the weak. As such, Xiao Chen naturally did not want his daughter to become such a person. However, Luan Luan's character made Xiao Chen feel at ease. Although she was a little mischievous, Luan Luan didn't bully the weak. Even when facing people weaker than her, Luan Luan would show kindness and help them. This made Xiao Chen feel relieved. Seeing how much Xiao Chen doted on Luan Luan, Lu Zongzi understood that someone like Luan Luan was probably the second generation with the deepest background in the first wilderness. With an heir apparent as her father, who would dare to offend her in the first wilderness? Lu Zongzi thought to himself. However, he soon recovered and looked at Xiao Chen. "Heir apparent, I have already informed the sect masters and family heads of the major sects in the 7 realms continent. I believe they will come soon." Xiao Chen had just arrived in the 7 realms continent. Naturally, he wanted to meet the sect masters and family heads of the major sections. Of course, not everyone was qualified to come. Among the people invited by Lu Zongzi, the weakest had reached the level of a saint sect. However, after hearing Lu Zongzi's words, Xiao Chen still felt that it was too troublesome. Xiao Chen didn't want to meet the sect masters and family heads of the saint sects and quasi-saint sects alone because it was too troublesome. Therefore, after a moment of silence, Xiao Chen said to Lu Zongzi, "Thank you for your trouble. However, I won't be meeting the others alone. Let junior brother Yu Shujin take me to meet them. As for the other people from the 4 great sage sects, please inform me when they arrive." He only planned to meet with the sect masters of the 5 great sage sects. As for the quasi-sage sects and saint-level sects, Xiao Chen gave Yu Shujin full authority to deal with them. After all, there were so many people. If Xiao Chen had to meet each of them alone, it would indeed be very troublesome. Therefore, it was a good choice to let Yu Shujin handle it directly. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Lu Zongzi and Yu Shujin both stood up and replied. This time, Xiao Chen came to the 7 realms continent to meet the sect masters of the 7 realms continent. Of course, his main purpose was to meet the 5 great sage sects. Secondly, he wanted to bring Luan Luan out to play. Ever since he had this daughter, Xiao Chen hadn't had much time to accompany her. Now that he had this rare opportunity, Xiao Chen intended to make up for it. Everyone chatted in the hall. Facing the gentle and approachable Xiao Chen, Lu Zongzi and the great sage of Tai Bai sect gradually relaxed. It could be seen that Xiao Chen wasn't an arrogant person. On the contrary, Xiao Chen gave Lu Zongzi and the others the impression that he was very restrained and indifferent. He didn't use his power to oppress others. He had always been very gentle when talking to everyone. While Xiao Chen and the others were chatting in the hall, Luan Luan was having fun in Tai Bai sect with the two maids and the female the great sage. It was no wonder that Luan Luan was so excited. This was the first time that she and Xiao Chen went on a long journey. Moreover, Tai Bai sect was the #1 sect in the Seven Realms continent. The location of the sect was naturally the last treasure land in the Seven Realms continent. The scenery was indeed beautiful. Putting aside the richness of the spiritual energy, Tai Bai sect was comparable to the 8 peaks where Hachibra Senkai was located. Of course, this was only talking about the scenery. In terms of richness of spiritual energy, the two naturally couldn't be compared. Along the way they visited several places. Luan Luan and the others came to a plum garden. Looking at the plum blossoms in full bloom, Luan Luan was so happy that she danced with joy. However, at this moment, a person who seemed to be an elder of Tai Bai sect found the great sage, who had been accompanying Luan Luan, and whispered something to her. Immediately, the beautiful face of the great sage changed slightly. She pondered for a moment and said to the elder, "I'll go. You help me look for Miss Xiao." Luan Luan didn't know what had happened, but it should be very serious. Besides, the great sage had to go personally to solve it. The great sage came to Luan Luan and said with an apologetic expression, "Miss Xiao, I suddenly have something to do here. I may have to leave." Luan Luan didn't mind that he had to leave for a while. Before the great sage finished his words, Luan Luan spoke in a childlike manner. "It's fine. I can play by myself." Luan Luan wasn't in the mood to care about these things. Besides, she was only 4 or 5 years old. She obviously wouldn't care about these things. Hearing Luan Luan's words, the great holy emperor smiled apologetically and then bid farewell to the two maids beside Luan Luan before leaving the plum blossom forest. Luan Luan wasn't displeased by the great sage's departure. After all, she didn't care about these things at all. Luan Luan continued to play in the plum blossom forest. At the end of the plum blossom forest, she saw the entrance to a cave. Without hesitation, she asked the elder who had stayed behind, "Where is this place?" Upon hearing Luan Luan's question, the elder replied truthfully, "Miss Xiao, this is the Tai Bai sect's herb garden." This small world was indeed the herb garden of the Tai Bai sect. It was specially planted with many spiritual herbs and spiritual fruit. Luan Luan's curiosity was piqued when she heard that it was a herb garden. She immediately asked, "Herb garden? Can I go in and play first?" Hearing Luan Luan's words, the elder hesitated. After all, the herb garden was considered a forbidden area in the White sect. Not just anyone could enter. However, after a moment of hesitation, the elder nodded. "All right. Miss Xiao, please wait for a moment. I will open the entrance." He didn't refuse Luan Luan because the great sage had said that he only needed to comply with Luan Luan's request. He couldn't refuse any of Luan Luan's requests. Moreover, although this herb garden was precious, it wasn't much. After all, there were only some ordinary spiritual herbs and spiritual fruits planted inside. As for the true treasures, they couldn't be artificially grown. Therefore, since Luan Luan wanted to enter and play, it wasn't a big deal. After hearing the elder's words, Luan Luan imitated the usual Xiao Chen. She cupped her hands and said, "If that's the case, then many thanks." Seeing Luan Luan deliberately imitating an adult, the elder felt a warmth in his heart. He couldn't help it. Luan Luan's appearance was really too lovable. He didn't say anything else and used his identity token to open the restriction on the herb garden's entrance. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. Chapter 1749. After fulfilling Luan Luan's request, the barrier around the herb garden was opened. Luan Luan happily ran into the herb garden. She passed through the entrance and soon arrived at the small world where the herb garden was located. As soon as she entered the herb garden, she smelled a rich fragrance. It was the fragrance of many spirit herbs and spirit fruit. The White Sex herb garden was very large, and there were many spirit herbs and spirit fruit. Of course, most of them were low-grade spirit herbs and spirit fruit. This was the first time Luan Luan was faced with so many spirit fruits and spirit herbs. She unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva and muttered with a pout. It smells so good. Luan Luan didn't know why, but she felt that the fragrance of these spirit herbs and spirit fruits was very fragrant. She couldn't stop her saliva from flowing out. Following behind Luan Luan, the White Sex deacon looked at the longing expression on Luan Luan's face. Then, he smiled and said, "There are many ripe spirit fruits in this herb garden. The taste is very good." Speaking of the White Sex herb garden, the elder's face revealed a proud smile. Indeed, the White Sex herb garden was undoubtedly the best in the entire Seven Realms continent. Unfortunately, Luan Luan wasn't stunned because of her surprise. As soon as the elder's voice fell, Luan Luan turned her head and looked at him with an adorable expression. Can we try the spirit fruits here?" In the face of the fragrance that was emitted from the medicinal garden, Luan Luan's appetite was indeed aroused. When he heard this, the elder readily agreed and immediately nodded his head. Of course, remembering the great sage's instructions, the elder didn't refuse Luan Luan's request. Moreover, the spirit fruits in the herb garden contained spirit energy. In his eyes, how much could a child like Luan Luan eat? It should be known that even if a warrior of the celestial realm ate the lowest grade spirit fruits in this herb garden, he could only eat at most 20 at a time. Because if one ate too many spirit fruits in a short period of time and was unable to refine the spirit energy in them in time, their meridians would definitely swell and hurt. Even a celestial realm martial artist could only eat 20 pills at a time, and Luan Luan obviously did not have the cultivation of a celestial realm martial artist. Moreover, she was still so young, and the meridians in her body had not yet fully matured. Under such circumstances, in the elder's opinion, Luan Luan could only eat 3 pills at most. 3 spirit fruits were nothing to the Tai Bai sect, so the elder agreed without hesitation. However, at this time, this elder clearly did not realize that his decision would bring a real disaster to the Tai Bai sect's medicine garden. Luan Luan's eyes flashed with excitement when she heard the elder's words. She subconsciously licked her lips and rushed toward the nearest fruit trees. Looking at Luan Luan's greedy appearance, the elder felt that she was very cute. Under his gaze, Luan Luan quickly climbed up the fruit tree, sat on the branch, and began to eat without caring about her image. She ate 1 spirit fruit at a time. In the blink of an eye, 5 spirit fruits were in Luan Luan's stomach. Seeing Luan Luan eat 5 spirit fruits in the blink of an eye, the elder's smile instantly froze. Just a moment ago, he was full of confidence that a little girl like Luan Luan could only eat 3 or 4 spirit fruits at most. But now, in the blink of an eye, 5 spirit fruits were in Luan Luan's stomach. Moreover, while the elder was in a daze, Luan Luan didn't stop eating. In less than 10 breaths of time, 10 spirit fruits were in Luan Luan's stomach. With a face full of satisfaction, Luan Luan patted her small belly and said, "It's delicious." She really liked the taste of these spirit fruits. After saying that, Luan Luan didn't stop and continued to eat. Seeing Luan Luan devouring the spirit fruits like a locust swarm, the elder came back to his senses. He looked at Luan Luan and said, "Slow down. You can't eat too much. You won't be able to refine the spirit energy and it will easily damage your meridians. These spirit fruits weren't ordinary fruit. Under normal circumstances, every time a spirit fruit was eaten, one had to sit cross-legged and refine it. After completely refining the spirit energy in the spirit fruit, one could only continue eating it. Who was like Luan Luan, who simply swallowed them whole. Not to mention refining them, she was simply swallowing them whole. He was afraid that something bad would happen to Luan Luan. However, Luan Luan didn't seem to care about the elder's words at all. She continued to eat and drink as she pleased. Seeing that Luan Luan didn't listen to his advice, the elder was worried and immediately prepared to stop Luan Luan. Unfortunately, even with his cultivation of the sage realm, he couldn't catch Luan Luan. Luan Luan didn't seem to be suppressed by his cultivation at all. She nimbly dodged his restraint with a leap. Celestial realm. Seeing that Luan Luan easily dodged his claw, the elder frowned and said. Previously, he did not deliberately sense Luan Luan's cultivation level. He just thought that a 4 or 5-year-old child could not have a high cultivation level. But now, the cultivation level that Luan Luan displayed was obviously at the level of the celestial realm. A 4 or 5-year-old child actually had the cultivation level of the celestial realm. This shocked the elder. However, if he knew that Luan Luan had the cultivation level of the celestial realm, and this was the result of only cultivating for an hour every day, then her cultivation level would definitely be higher than this. But the shock of cultivation was nothing to the elder. What really surprised him was that Luan Luan was actually able to dodge his restraint with her cultivation of the celestial realm. This was simply too inconceivable. One must know that he had the cultivation of the sage realm. The gap between the sage realm and the celestial realm couldn't even be described as the gap between the heaven and the earth. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that a celestial realm warrior in front of a sage realm warrior probably didn't even need the sage realm warrior to make a move. The sage realm warrior's aura alone was enough to make a celestial realm warrior explode and die, let alone dodge the restraint of a sage realm warrior. After successfully dodging the elder's restraint, Luan Luan's eyes flashed with a touch of displeasure. What are you doing? Obviously, Luan Luan was very dissatisfied with the elder's action. Hearing her words, the elder came back to his senses and smiled with a complicated expression. Those are spirit fruits. It's not good to eat too much. Humph, I think you're just unwilling to part with them. Stingy guy. You clearly promised to give them to me, but now you're going back on your word. Humph, I'll just ask my father to compensate you for how much I eat. Luan Luan coldly snorted and said, Please collect, please vote, please recommend me. Chapter 1750. Hearing Luan Luan's words, the elder felt somewhat helpless, but he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he shifted his gaze to the 2 maids who were responsible for taking care of Luan Luan. The elder knew that Luan Luan's identity wasn't simple, so he didn't dare to act rashly. He was afraid that he would accidentally hurt Luan Luan, and that would be troublesome. Therefore, he could only seek help from the 2 maids. However, facing his gaze, the 2 maids didn't have the slightest change in expression. One of them said indifferently, Elder, don't worry. We will compensate for all the losses in the herb garden. The 2 maids weren't too worried about Luan Luan. After all, they had taken care of Luan Luan for a long time. They knew that even though Luan Luan was young, she was definitely not an ordinary person. The 2 maids trusted Luan Luan and didn't think that Luan Luan would have any problems because of these spirit fruit. However, the elder didn't know that. Therefore, after hearing the 2 maids' reply, the elder was stunned. Then, he smiled helplessly in his heart. It's not because I can't bear to part with these spirit fruits. Indeed, the elder wasn't reluctant to part with these spirit fruits. After all, he was under the command of the great sage. Therefore, no matter how many spirit fruits Luan Luan ate, nothing would happen to her. What he was worried about was Luan Luan's safety. He was afraid that something would happen to Luan Luan after eating so many spirit fruit. However, while the elder was in a daze, Luan Luan had already jumped onto another fruit tree and started eating. He couldn't count how many spirit fruits Luan Luan had eaten, but seeing that Luan Luan didn't seem to have any abnormalities, the elder gradually felt relieved. But in his heart the elder was still puzzled. Luan Luan ate so many spirit fruits, so where did all the spirit energy go? It wasn't refined at all. Could it be that the spirit energy was fine in her body? The elder couldn't figure it out, but Luan Luan didn't care about it. At this moment she was eating happily. In the herb garden, Luan Luan was eating to her heart's content. In the main hall, Shao Chen and the people of the Tai sect chatted for a while before preparing to leave. The sect leader of the Tai sect, Lu Zongzi, had specially prepared a cave residence for Shao Chen. After leaving the main hall, Shao Chen planned to find Luan Luan first. This little girl was playing around in the Tai sect. Who knew what kind of trouble she would cause? Shao Chen found out Luan Luan's location very easily. Then, accompanied by Lu Zongzi, Shao Chen came to a faraway place. As soon as the two of them entered the herb garden, they saw the Luan Luan frantically sweeping through the garden, as well as the empty fruit trees. Seeing this, Lu Zongzi's expression changed. He immediately shouted at the elder, "What are you doing?" Lu Zongzi naturally wasn't distressed over these spirit fruits, but he was worried about Luan Luan's body. After eating so many spirit fruits, how could her body withstand it? The elder replied helplessly to Lu Zongzi's questioning. Sect leader, He wanted to say that he had no choice, but before the elder could finish speaking, Shao Chen spoke up. It's fine. Shao Chen didn't have the intention to blame the elder. Moreover, he wasn't worried that Luan Luan would have any problems because of these spirit fruit. After saying that, Shao Chen looked at Luan Luan, who was sitting on a tree branch, and shouted, "Luan Luan, you're messing around again." Hearing Shao Chen's words, Luan Luan shuddered, but she quickly ran to Shao Chen obediently. She held a few spirit fruits with an adorable expression and said with a smile, "Daddy, these fruits are delicious. You should eat them too." The little girl clearly knew that as long as Shao Chen was angry, she would act coquettishly and act cute. This method was absolutely useful. Seeing Luan Luan's adorable expression, Shao Chen smiled helplessly and said, "You're messing around. You've had enough of being crazy today. Come back with me." Hearing Shao Chen's words, Luan Luan nodded obediently. Then, Shao Chen took out some pills and talismans from his storage ring and handed them over to Lu Zongzi. After all, Luan Luan had eaten so many spirit fruit. It was only right for her to give some compensation. Moreover, the talismans and pills that Shao Chen took out had all reached the immortal grade. For the Tai sect, these were absolutely priceless treasures. Their value far exceeded the spirit fruits that Luan Luan had eaten. There was no comparison between the two. Ignoring Lu Zongzi's stunned expression, Shao Chen directly stuffed the pills and talismans into his hands. Then, he brought Luan Luan back to his cave. Shao Chen wasn't in a hurry since he had to stay in the Tai sect for a few more days. In the next few days, Shao Chen took Luan Luan to play around the Tai sect. At the same time, several days had passed. The patriarchs and patriarchs of the various sects of the Seven Realms continent had arrived at the Tai sect one after another. They had received a message from Lu Zongzi saying that Shao Chen had personally come to the Seven Realms continent. Naturally, they didn't dare to have the slightest neglect. However, as previously mentioned, among the patriarchs and patriarchs of the various sects, only the patriarchs of the 5 great sage sects could personally meet Shao Chen. As for the others, they were all handled by Yu Jin. Many of the important figures of the Seven Realms continent had gathered at the Tai bisect. While Shao Chen was in the Seven Realms continent, on the 8th peak of the Immortal Realm continent, the Hachibra Senkai, an incident that shocked everyone happened on this day. Yi Xiao was seriously injured. The attacker was Mu Fan, and his method was also a sneak attack. When the news that Yi Xiao was seriously injured by Mu Fan spread, many people in the Hachibra Senkai were shocked. Guan Hong and the other heirs of the Nine Realms continent immediately came to visit Yi Xiao. In the 8th Realm Palace, in Yi Xiao's cave residence, Guan Hong, Fu Rui, Hong Xiu, and the others were currently in Yi Xiao's cave residence. At this moment, Yi Xiao was lying on the bed. His aura could be said to be extremely weak. Looking at Yi Xiao's appearance, everyone present had a complicated expression on their faces. It wasn't the first time that Mu Fan had attacked Yi Xiao. However, this time, Mu Fan was indeed too bold. He actually attacked in the 8th peak. Looking at Yi Xiao, a cold light flashed in Fu Rui's eyes. This Mu Fan is indeed a little too much. We're all heirs of the Nine Realms continent. Does he think that he can kill whoever he wants? They were all heirs of the Nine Realms continent, but Mu Fan's actions were indeed a little too much. He completely disregarded everyone else. Hearing Fu Rui's words, Guan Hong, who was at the side, was deep in thought. That's strange. Mu Fan almost killed Yi Xiao in the 8th peak, but the Realm Lords haven't reacted at all. What's going on? Fu Rui was furious, but Guan Hong was clearly thinking about more things. The first thing that came to his mind was Hong Lian and the other Realm Lords. Why hadn't they reacted at all? This shouldn't be the case, especially Hong Lian. One had to know that Yi Xiao was the heir of the 8th realm. Now that he was seriously injured by Mu Fan, Hong Lian didn't even say a word. This was very strange. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1751. When Guan Hong said this, everyone present was stunned. That's right, why didn't Red Lotus say anything when Yi Xiao was severely injured? After all, she was the sector lord of the 8th realm. Everyone was extremely puzzled. Things were indeed a little too abnormal. Just as everyone was puzzled, Yi Xiao, who was lying on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. He smiled bitterly and said weakly, Mu Fan can devour and refine the will of the heavenly way. It was a simple sentence, but it stunned everyone present. Mu Fan was able to refine and devour the will of the heavenly way. After hearing this sentence, everyone quickly understood what was going on. What was the real goal of the Hachibra Senkai? It was to create a new world that was not controlled by heaven and earth. As such, eradicating the will of the heavenly way was obviously the first goal of the entire Hachibra Senkai. Eradicating the will of the heavenly way was not an easy task. Look at the will of the heavenly way. It had been imprisoned by the Hachibra Senkai for so many years. During this period, the Hachibra Senkai had tried countless methods, but they were still unable to completely destroy the first wilderness. After countless attempts, the sector lords of the Hachibra Senkai finally came to the conclusion that the will of the heavenly way was an almost immortal existence. It was impossible to kill it. The only way to destroy the will of the heavenly way was to assimilate it, devour it, and refine it. However, to devour and refine the will of the heavenly way was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. In the past, Luoli and a few other sector lords had tried to devour and refine the will of the heavenly way, but none of them succeeded. According to their guesses, to successfully devour and refine the will of the heavenly way, there must be a very high requirement in terms of physique. This was the only way to succeed. It could be said that devouring and refining the will of the heavenly way was the top priority of the Hachibra Senkai. Of course, there was another point. Experts at Luo Li's level could vaguely feel that the Immortal Emperor realm was not the limit. Although the Immortal Emperor realm was on par with the will of the Heavenly Way, there were no records of new realms beyond that. At the same time, Luo Li and the others did not know the specific method of breaking through to the Immortal Emperor realm. However, they guessed that if they could devour and refine the will of the Heavenly Way's energy of the Heavenly Way, they could break through to the of the Heavenly Way. After all, warriors represented all living beings, and the will of the Heavenly Way represented heaven and earth. If the power of all living beings and heaven and earth could converge on one person at the same time, it could very well be the key to unlocking a new realm. Combining these 2 points, everyone quickly realized why Luo Li, Hong Lian, and the other sector lords did not express any opinions on this matter. No wonder. Quan Feng let out a sigh and said indifferently, Mu Fan could devour and refine the will of the Heavenly Way. In this case, Mu Fan's significance to the Hachibra Senkai was not as simple as an heir apparent. To put it bluntly, to the entire Hachibra Senkai, Mu Fan was now an irreplaceable existence. The Hachibra Senkai needed Mu Fan, so no matter what Mu Fan did, the Hachibra Senkai would not give up on him, let alone punish him. Perhaps this was the fundamental reason why Mu Fan dared to make a move on the 8th peak. It was because he had nothing to fear. Everyone had mixed feelings. Yi Xiao had a bitter look on his face. As for Hong Xiu, she could not help but tremble slightly. Mu Fan had previously made Hong Xiu extremely fearful. Now, Mu Fan had displayed the ability to refine the will of the Heavenly Way. In this case, Hong Xiu would be even more unscrupulous. While everyone was feeling a myriad of emotions because of Mu Fan's matter, on the other side, in the main hall of the First Realm, Luo Li and the other sector lords had gathered together. All the sector lords had gathered together to discuss Mu Fan. It could be said that Mu Fan's matter was now the most important matter in the Hachibra Senkai. There was nothing more important than this matter. On the main seat, a middle-aged man who looked 70 to 80% similar to Mu Fan sat upright. This man was the sector lord of the First Realm, who was also Mu Fan's father, Mu Tai. Mu Tai sat on the main seat and looked at the other sector lords on both sides. He had a faint smile on his face. Everyone, Mu Fan is already certain that he will be able to refine the will of the Heavenly Way. Hearing this, Luo Li and the other sector lords had different expressions. Some were happy, some were excited, and at the same time, complicated. Compared to the others, Hong Lian's expression was the most complicated. She thought helplessly in her heart, why did it have to be Mu Fan? Hong Lian knew all the things that Mu Fan had done to Hong Xiu since she was young. In the past, Hong Lian could still suppress Mu Fan. However, now that Mu Fan was able to refine the will of the Heavenly Way, Hong Lian could already imagine that Mu Fan would not even put her in his eyes. Especially after this incident, the other Hachibra Senkai's sector lords would probably choose Mu Fan over Hong Xiu without hesitation. Since Mu Fan hated Hong Xiu and wanted to take revenge on her all the time, he might as well give up on her. This was probably what the other sector lords were thinking. Hong Lian's heart was extremely complicated. Even she did not know how to handle this matter. Send Hong Xiu out of the Hachibra Senkai? It seemed like that was the only way. However, where could they send Hong Xiu? The first wilderness was definitely out of the question. After all, it was not too difficult for Mu Fan to find Hong Xiu in the first wilderness. However, if they sent Hong Xiu out of the first wilderness to another wilderness, it would be very dangerous. After all, Hong Xiu was a member of the Hachibra Senkai and was her daughter. Once her identity was exposed, the consequences would be unimaginable. To put it bluntly, after Mu Fan successfully displayed the ability to refine the will of the Heavenly Way, Hong Lian probably did not have any support left. In the past, the other sector lords would pity Hong Xiu and speak up for her. However, from now on, they would probably not do so. Not only would they not do so, they might even stand on Mu Fan's side. For example, Yi Zhao's incident this time. Mu Fan had attacked and severely injured Yi Xiao in the 8th peak. However, in the end, other than Luo Li, the other sector lords did not speak up for Yi Xiao. Furthermore, no one wanted to punish Mu Fan. Because Mu Fan could refine the will of the heavenly way, the other sector lords had already stood on Mu Fan's side. In their opinion, Yi Xiao and the other heirs of heirs could be sacrificed, but Mu Fan definitely could not. This was because only he could refine the will of the heavenly way. Hong Lian's face was filled with bitterness. Hence, she did not listen to what Mu Tai was saying. She only regained her senses after everyone had finished discussing Mu Fan's matter. She looked at Mu Tai with a complicated gaze. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1752. Mu Tai ignored Red Lotus' gaze. After this discussion, there was no doubt that Mu Fan's status in the Hachibra Senkai would surpass all the other heirs of Kunlun. He would become the focus of the Hachibra Senkai's training. The sector lords left one after another. Red Lotus also walked out of the main hall alone. However, just as she walked out of the main hall, she saw Luo Li waiting for her from afar. Luo Li smiled bitterly when he saw Red Lotus. Send her away. Luo Li's intention was clear. He wanted Red Lotus to send Hong Xiu away from the Hachibra Senkai. Judging from the situation just now, other than Luo Li, the other sector lords were already on Mu Fan's side. Hearing this, a bitter expression appeared on Hong Lian's face as she said, "Where can I send it?" "Anywhere is better than Hachibra Senkai," Luo Li said in a low voice. Red Lotus did not reply. The two of them walked side by side. After a few steps, Luo Li said, "What happened back then?" Red Lotus's expression changed when she heard Luo Li's words. She immediately interrupted him. "Let's not talk about what happened back then. Now that things had developed to this point, even Red Lotus, who was a celestial emperor, was helpless. The most important reason was that the other sector lords were on Mu Fan's side. Red Lotus could not do anything alone. The few sector lords had already decided on Mu Fan's matter. In the 8th realm, in Yi Zhao's cave dwelling, everyone was still having complicated thoughts about Mu Fan's matter. However, at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the cave dwelling. Guan Hong's expression changed slightly when he noticed this. After exchanging glances with each other, Guan Hong, Fu Rui, and Quan Feng strode out of the cave. As soon as they stepped out of the cave, they saw Mu Fan with more than 10 geniuses from the 1st realm. The sounds of fighting had been caused by Mu Fan beating up several geniuses from the 8th realm. Seeing Mu Fan appear here, Guan Hongguang, Fu Rui, and Quan Feng's faces changed. Among them, Fu Rui's face darkened as he said, "Mu Fan, what are you doing here?" To be honest, they didn't have any good feelings towards Mu Fan. However, Mu Fan didn't seem to mind as he sneered. "What are you doing?" "Of course, I'm here to bring my good little sister back." Was he here to pick up Miss Hongxiu? Hearing this, Guan Hong and the other two furrowed their brows. Mu Fan wanted to take Hongxiu away. There was no doubt that Hongxiu would not have a good ending. A cold glint flashed in Fu Rui's eyes as he coldly said, "Mu Fan, what if we don't agree? Do you have the right to refuse? Cut the crap. Let my good little sister come out." Hearing this, Mu Fan still sneered. He didn't care about Fu Rui and the other two at all. Hearing this, the three of them looked even colder. However, seeing this, Mu Fan sneered. "Why? Do you want to fight?" "Now that I'm important to the Hachibra Senkai, what do you think the consequences will be if you hurt me?" 1 against 3, Mu Fan was definitely not a match for Fu Rue and the other two. There was no doubt about this. However, would Fu Rue and the other two dare to fight? Obviously, they didn't dare to do so. With Mu Fan's current importance to the Eight Desolation immortal world, the World Lords would definitely not allow any harm to come to Mu Fan. Since Mu Fan dared to come here, he naturally had something to rely on. Seeing this, the anger in Fu Rue and the other two's hearts grew even stronger. However, they did not make a move in the end. Mu Fan was right. Fu Rue and the other two couldn't fight. Today, Mu Fan wasn't just the heir of the First Realm. It could be said that Mu Fan was now the hope of the entire Hachibara Senkai. Seeing that the three of them didn't show any signs of fighting, Mu Fan smiled and said, "Since you're not going to fight, let my good little sister come out. Or do you want me to go in personally?" Naturally, Yi Zhao's cave dwelling had a prohibition spell. However, this kind of prohibition spell only served as an early warning. It was impossible to stop Mu Fan with just this prohibition spell. Hearing this, Fu Rue and the other two were furious. However, they didn't know what to do at this moment. They didn't have a good impression of Mu Fan, but they also knew that it wasn't wise to offend Mu Fan now. After all, Mu Fan's status was different. Fu Rue and the other two were in a dilemma. At this moment, Hong Lian's figure appeared on the scene. When Hong Lian appeared, her beautiful eyes stared deadly at Mu Fan. Facing Hong Lian, extreme hatred flashed across Mu Fan's eyes. He then sneered. "My good mother, why are you here?" Facing Red Lotus, Mu Fan did not have the slightest bit of motherly feelings. On the contrary, there was only a thick hatred. At the same time, Red Lotus' attitude towards Mu Fan was also very cold. She only said indifferently, "Don't go overboard." As soon as Hong Lian returned to the Eighth Realm, she felt Mu Fan's aura. She rushed over immediately and saw the scene in front of her. However, after hearing Hong Lian's words, Mu Fan didn't seem to be affected by her words. Instead, he continued to smile. "Overboard? My good mother, as a brother, I'm here to bring my little sister home. Is this overboard?" He wasn't afraid of Hong Lian at all. Upon hearing this, the coldness in Hong Lian's eyes intensified. She glared at Mu Fan and said coldly, "Don't go overboard. Don't force me to fight." Hong Lian naturally wouldn't allow Mu Fan to take Hong Xiu away. Even if she had to attack Mu Fan, she would never agree. As a celestial emperor, if Hong Lian attacked Mu Fan wouldn't be able to resist. However, after hearing Hong Lian's words, Mu Fan remained unmoved. He wasn't afraid of Hong Lian at all. As soon as Hong Lian finished speaking, before Mu Fan could reply, an indifferent voice rang out. Along with the voice, Mu Tai's figure appeared. "You're really a cruel woman. How can you be so cruel to your own son?" Mu Tai's appearance was obviously the reason why Mu Fan wasn't afraid of Hong Lian. When Hong Lian looked at Mu Tai, she instantly understood that Mu Fan's arrival was probably because the father and son had joined forces. They were really impatient. Mu Fan had just displayed his ability to devour and refine the will of the heavenly way, and the father and son couldn't wait to take revenge on Hong Lian and Hong Xiu. Hong Lian's eyes were filled with hatred as she looked at Mu Tai. She gritted her teeth and said, "Mu Tai, you're really a beast. You're worse than a beast. Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1753. With the appearance of Mu Tai, the coldness in Red Lotus' eyes reached its peak. However, Mu Tai only smiled when he heard her words. "Beast? Lian'er, I am doing this for the sake of Hachibara Senkai. Don't call me Lian'er. With me here today, no one can take Xiu away." Red Lotus shouted coldly. Hong Lian had no intention of backing down. However, when Mu Tai heard Hong Lian's words, he sneered coldly. Lian the situation today is no longer up to you. Without waiting for Red Lotus to reply, Mu Tai said to Mu Fan, let's do it. Let's see who can stop you today. Mu Tai was very supportive of Mu Fan's actions. Logically speaking, as a father, Hongxiu should be Mu Tai's daughter. However, Mu Tai did not act like a father to Hongxiu at all. Hearing Mu Tai's words, Mu Fan immediately prepared to attack. However, at this moment, a powerful aura erupted from Red Lotus' body. Red Lotus' face was gloomy as she looked at Mu Fan and said word by word. How dare you? Red Lotus naturally could not watch Mu Fan take Hongxiu away. Seeing this, Mu Tai took a step forward, and an aura that was not weaker than Red Lotus erupted from his body as he spoke coldly. Red Lotus, you can't protect her today. Without waiting for Red Lotus to reply, Mu Tai directly attacked. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the air. The space around the two of them seemed to be imprisoned in an instant. Then, Red Lotus and Mu Tai's figures soared into the sky at the same time and immediately started fighting in the air. Red Lotus was entangled with Mu Tai. On the other side, without Red Lotus obstruction, Mu Fan strode towards Fu Rui and the other two and said with a smile on his face, "Why? Do you want to stop me?" Facing Fu Rui and the other two at the same time, Mu Fan was not the slightest bit nervous. Hearing this, Fu Rui and the other two snorted and did not retreat at all. Although Mu Fan had displayed his ability to devour and refine the will of the heavenly way, it was still impossible for him to fight against the three of them alone. Therefore, Fu Rui and the other two were not afraid of Mu Fan at all. Furthermore, Mu Fan had been so overbearing today. As Hachibra Senkai's heir, Fu Rui and the other two were naturally unhappy. Hence, how could they retreat just because of a few words from Mu Fan? Seeing that the three of them had no intention of backing down, the sneer in Mu Fan's eyes grew even more intense. At the same time, Fu Rui and the other two received a transmission from their respective realm lords. The content was very simple. It was to tell them not to bother about Mu Fan and Hongxiu. Other than Luoli, the rest of the sector lords sent messages to their respective heirs, telling them not to bother about the matter between Mu Fan and Hongxiu. After receiving such a message, Fu Rui and the other two's expressions changed slightly. Then, they looked at Mu Fan with complicated expressions. As heirs, Fu Rui and the others were naturally not fools. At this time, the sector lords had made such a decision because of the change in Mu Fan's status. It should be known that the sector lords had been relatively impartial when it came to the matter between Mu Fan and Hongxiu. However, now that Mu Fan had displayed his ability to devour and refine the will of the heavenly way, the sector lords had immediately changed their attitude. It was obvious that they were already on Mu Fan's side. In the eyes of the sector lords, Mu Fan was now too important to the Hachibra Senkai. Therefore, although the sector lords would not directly interfere in the matter between him and Hongxiu, they were undoubtedly on Mu Fan's side. This change had nothing to do with right or wrong. It was entirely because Mu Fan was far more important to the Hachibra Senkai than Hongxiu. Because of this, the sector lords sent messages to Fu Rui and the other heirs, telling them not to interfere in this matter. Hearing this, Fu Rui and the others' expressions changed slightly. They looked at Mu Fan with mixed feelings and unwillingness. At the same time, facing the gazes of the three people, Mu Fan smiled coldly. "Can you move aside now?" Hearing this, Fu Rui and the others did not reply. However, they took a step to the side. Their intentions were clear. Since the various sector lords had already spoken, they naturally had no reason to disobey. Looking at Fu Rui and the other two's actions, the smile on Mu Fan's face became even more radiant. Then, he took a step forward and arrived at the entrance of the cave. Without much effort, he broke through the restriction of the cave and entered Yi Zhao's cave. Mu Fan successfully entered Yi Zhao's cave. At this moment, in Yi Zhao's cave, Hong Xiu's face was filled with fear. Qiu Ru and Lu Xiao, who were in the cave, had naturally received the messages from the sector lords. They had also told Hong Xiu about it. Sorry. The two of them looked at Hong Xiu and said. Their intentions were clear. They would not interfere in the matter between Mu Fan and Hong Xiu. The other heirs left one after another. Only the heavily injured Yi Xiao and Hong Xiu were left. How could they stop Mu Fan? Just as Hong Xiu's face was filled with fear, Mu Fan walked into the courtyard. With a glance, he saw Hong Xiu's ugly expression. Mu Fan lightly smiled and said, "My good little sister, I'm here to pick you up." Hearing Mu Fan's words, Hong Xiu's body trembled uncontrollably. Qiu Ru and Lu Xiao consciously retreated to the side, showing that they would not interfere in this matter. Qiu Ru and Lu Xiao retreated to the side to express their intentions. Seeing this, Yi Xiao, who was lying on the bed, was furious. However, he was heavily injured and could not do anything. It was difficult for him to even move his body, let alone protect Hong Xiu. Seeing Mu Fan walk step by step towards Hong Xiu, Yi Zhao's eyes were bloodshot. The anger in his eyes was like an erupting volcano. But even so, what could he do? Mu Fan did not even look at him. He only stared at Hong Xiu and said with a cold smile, "My good sister, come home with your brother." As he spoke, Mu Fan stretched out his hand. With his strength, it was easy for him to subdue Hong Xiu. Her eyes were filled with fear. However, at this moment, no one stood up to help her. Being subdued by Mu Fan, Hong Xiu's heart was filled with helplessness and fear. She looked at Yi Xiao, who was lying on the bed. Unfortunately, Yi Xiao could not do anything. She watched helplessly as Mu Fan took Hong Xiu away right under Yi Zhao's nose. From the beginning to the end, Mu Fan had not even glanced at Yi Xiao. Hong Xiu wanted to struggle. However, with her strength, how could she break free from Mu Fan's control? Holding Hong Xiu in one hand, Mu Fan strode out of the cave. Qiu Ru and Lu Xiao only watched from the side. They had no intention of stopping him. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.